AAC. MasterPal is an acronym. We all know that modeling is a really key component of supporting individuals to learn their AAC systems, but there are things that we can do to make interactions as naturalistic and engaging and motivating as possible. And those are the things we're going to talk about today. M is for motivate. A, accept multiple modalities. S, statements more than questions. T is for time, and this includes both wait time and time for growth and language development. E, engage naturally. R, response not required. And then we get into the PAL, presume potential, appropriate prompting, and let the child lead. But Master PAL clearly has a double meaning. When someone is a master, they're skilled, they're talented, they have competence in their area of expertise, and a PAL is a friend. So this is really a bid for us to be skilled companions and communication partners. A friend is someone you want to spend time with and want to engage with. There are two essential understandings that underpin MasterPal. The first among these is that communication is not compliance. We're really looking at those behaviors, belief systems, our practices, and our language, and how they impact the dynamic of interactions. We want to support autonomous communicators, communicators who feel that their unique voice is being heard. It also holds that everyone is a communicator. We use lots of modalities, verbal and nonverbal, but we all have something to say. It's innate to our human experience. The second underpinning is that teaching AAC is not intuitive. It is often said, just use the device, just model, just point to the symbols. And that is not as easily said as done more often than not. So we're going to explore topics about why imitation is not really what we're going for. We really want authentic voices. It looks at the fact that many interactions are goal-oriented rather than relationship-focused, and we really want to focus on that relationship. We look at the fact that communication is transactional, so communication partners are a huge part of this equation. We're looking at how we can strike a balance between not dominating the conversation and also not putting the full burden of the conversation on the individual who uses AAC. Intrinsic motivation is also really, really key and important, so we're going to take a look at that as well. So what's in the box? MasterPal is a Google folder, and here's the link right here. Inside the Google folder, there are getting started materials, so you can get an overview of MasterPal. There is a Google slide for each module, as well as a handout. There's a folder of supplemental resources, but this right here is the facilitator guideline. And this, I think, is where the greatest value, perhaps, of MasterPal comes. So inside, the facilitator guideline is really intended so that anyone invested in this conversation can take these materials and lead a conversation, lead a discussion, lead a training. It includes warm-up discussions. There are slide-by-slide talking points for the Google slide. Also links to supplemental handouts. And then if there are additional activities such as video links or interactive activities or extension resources, those are also included in the facilitator guideline. Really, no expert is needed. If you are invested in this conversation and understand the basic principles, which really are laid out for you, then you can share this information with others. So we are going to explore these modules, just a snapshot of each of the modules, and we're going to do it in a couple different, there's some broader topics that they fall under. So Speak AAC is the first that we will explore, and this looks at model and time in terms of language development. Empower communication includes presume potential, motivate, and accept multiple modalities. Engage them explores statements more than questions and response not required. Shape the interaction will include wait time, appropriate prompting, and let the child lead. And then we'll finish by synthesizing MasterPal. Engage naturally pulls many of the elements of the other modules together. And then we'll also take a moment to just consider the learning that can happen through this process and how we might plan and prioritize how to apply and use MasterPal. So I want to leave you with one final thought, and that is this. Relationship building is a pedagogical strategy. So relationship building is so important for learning. Clearly, just by the title MasterPal, that is, that is conveyed. But the relationships that we build through communication, communication is really about connection. First and foremost. So we want to really put that at the center. But I also think that Master Pal becomes a journey for those who participate within our school communities, within our broader neighborhood-based communities, within the communities that we have with those that we're supporting. It's important that we're there, that we can travel this journey and have others to support us along the way. All right, we're going to start today by talking about Speak AAC. We're going to explore the modules of model and time as it refers to language development. There we go. So this is where they fall in terms of our Master Pal grid. So model is the strategy where we point to symbols on the device as we speak, and we want to do this as much as possible. Life happens, so of course it's really hard to do it all the time, but the idea is that we aren't waiting for students or children or individuals to prove anything. We want to provide them modeling, not just in response to their bids for communication, but just as we interact with them throughout their day. By definition, a model is a system or a thing used as an example to follow. And when we teach language, it's a really dynamic process. So we are not looking for imitation tasks so much as showing kids and showing individuals, this is what it looks like to talk with your device or your tool or your book or your board. This is how you can influence your environment. So we play the role of being a communicator so that they can learn to be a communicator by following our model. Modeling essentially means speak your words and use AAC to do it. When we speak AAC, we teach kids really important pieces about how to interact and engage with others. We teach them how to control and influence their environment. When we control and influence our environment, when we direct the action of others, when we make things happen, when we gain access to things that are important and meaningful to us. We also, by the words that we select, express our individuality. So that's really empowering as well. We show kids how to demonstrate what they're learning and what they're understanding by describing what we see and what we understand and how we're processing the world around us. It also allows us to build and sustain relationships in meaningful ways. Now, a lot of this also happens through nonverbal communication, but when we add verbal communication, when we add symbols and extra meaning, extra context, then it allows us to further strengthen and sustain those interactions. In this way, we teach that language is power, and when kids understand that language is power, then they're much more invested in the process of learning. Speaking AAC also teaches more concrete skills. So it teaches how to combine words to create meaning and also how to rearrange those words to change meaning. It teaches how to fix mistakes. When we speak, we often pause and revise what we're saying mid-statement and keep going. And the same thing can happen with AAC. We don't always have to get it right. When we think aloud about how to find words, we teach kids, we teach how to navigate and we teach strategy. And then there's also the use of function tools, clear, back, home buttons, even how to navigate tabs or turn pages in a communication book or move left to right. All of those functions teach, how to interact. But ultimately, it shows that language is messy. And I love this because I think it is so important that we all have grace with ourselves. One of the biggest barriers to modeling AAC can be the fear, the hesitation about getting started because I don't know where things are, I don't understand it, I don't know how to do this. But diving right in and just embracing the mess and the messiness of it can not only be good for us in terms of our own learning, but it can actually be really good for those that we are supporting because they can see that it's messy and we don't have to always get it right. And we're going to learn together. So I love this quote, having a communication device doesn't make you an effective communicator any more than having a piano makes you a musician. It really captures the idea that it requires instruction, it requires practice, it requires persistence, and that you get better over time. It doesn't happen all at once. So language development is important to look at because it really guides our practices as modelers. Language development is a process that occurs over time and this is a hugely important and in response to motivations and interactions that are shaped by the individual's environment and relationships. When we look at language development, we know that it is acquired in a pretty predictable fashion, regardless of whether a child is typically developing in their language or has a communication delay or impairment. But we see gradual increases in communicative intent, and this is the purposes for communicating. So whether we're requesting or commenting or asking questions, sharing information, those are all reasons for communicating. And those expand really, kids acquire those really at a very young age. It includes use of symbolic language. So symbolic language is the use of concrete symbols to represent specific things, also ideas and concepts. It includes words, either spoken or written, signs, or clearly pictures and symbols. Their vocabulary repertoire expands, and this is both receptively and expressively. And then words are combined, and increasing lengths, the length of utterance increases, and ultimately grammatical forms and grammatical markers are integrated for more sophisticated language. But acquisition of language is a direct reflection of a child's environment. So it's going to reflect their culture, their dialect, and it's going to reflect the natural context in which they interact. So modeling is not learned. It's not a part of the day. It's in every part of the day. The language development that occurs over the first 5 years is amazing. It's absolutely exponential. If you just consider for a moment how language grows between birth and 6 months, and then again between 6 and 18 months, and oh my gosh, between 18 months and 3 years, and then gracious, between 3 years and 5 years, it's incredible the amount of language that a child acquires. But it doesn't happen all at once. And when a child is using AAC, just because they get a device, it's not going to happen all at once either. It will take years of modeling and of opportunities and exploration and natural context in order for that to emerge. It's also important that we remember that language is not an activity. We don't put it on the calendar and call it language practice time. But language is a part of every interaction. It's a part of every activity. So we can integrate it. It doesn't mean that we have to be talking all day using the device, but it could mean that we make sure we have the device available, and we perhaps model a couple of phrases every hour or every activity or every transition. Another key component is that adults are not gatekeepers of words. So we've all had the occasion where a child has said something, perhaps something we didn't want them to say, in the exact tone, intonation, with the right cadence of a familiar adult. And we hear it and we say, oh, wow, I know exactly where he got that. Kids self-select their vocabulary. So when we are looking at supporting a child's language development, we have to give them words. We have to give them lots of words. A communication display that has 2 or 4 or 8 buttons on it is not going to give them a lot of control over their environment. It's not going to give them a lot of leverage to combine symbols to create meaning. It's going to be very limiting, and they're not going to have a lot of autonomy in what they are selecting. So we do need to, access is, there's lots of different ways to support access for kids with complex bodies or complex sensory needs, but we really do need to be mindful of the fact that kids need access to words in order for language to develop. So another way that language development is our guide for teaching AAC is that what a child gives us influences what we give back. If a child says go using their tool, or even through gestures and body language and through their nonverbal means, we are going to give language to that, and we're going to say, oh, go, and we'll point to it on their device. We might expand it a little and say go out. And so on their device, we'll point to go out. Those are the bold words, while we articulate verbally the full idea. You want to go outside. Me too. Let's go. If a child indicates or expresses help, we can expand upon that by saying help open on their device and verbalizing, let me help you open it. If a child expresses on, we can expand that by put on, while we verbally share the full idea, I can help you put on your jacket. If a child says or expresses not like, if they're refusing putting their hand up, we can point to you not like or you do not like as we say, I know you do not like that. We're almost done. So in this way, we're not bound to use AAC for every word that we speak, but we're expanding upon what they give us to support their language development. So there are also exploratory language behaviors that we might observe with individuals who are learning to use their AAC. These could include babbling, self-talk, or repetition. And I bring this up because I think it's really important that we recognize the role of these exploratory language behaviors in language development. This can help kids gain ownership of their voice. That exploration can also allow them to navigate with increasing purpose. So that exploration piece could be part of their learning, and it may not seem purposeful, but it may indeed be more purposeful than is really observable. When they are doing this, it can be important for us to respond meaningfully. So even if it seems kind of random, if we can give meaning or expand upon or comment on the words that they give us, it helps them to understand that those words have meaning, and it can motivate them to use their AAC with increasing purpose. We also need to recognize that this is not necessarily a stimming behavior, but it is truly part of the language development process. So just to recap, modeling, it means speak your words, and all language is learned through modeling, whether it's part of the developmental process, whether you're learning a foreign language or AAC, all language is learned through modeling, and what is learned is a direct reflection of the environment and the natural context in which individuals interact. Typical language development is our guide for teaching AAC, so we always want to be mindful of where kids are and what skills they're gaining, so we can continue to up the ante. And language development is messy, and this is beautiful that it's messy because it gives us the grace to move forward, even if we don't feel completely confident, and to have faith and confidence that kids are learning through that process just as we are. Our next topic is empower communication, and this includes the modules presume potential, motivate, and accept multiple modalities. So this is where they fall on our MasterPal framework. Presume potential is a mindset, and the thing about mindsets is that they cannot be mandated. We can shape mindsets through experiences and information and opportunities, and a lot of this happens incidentally. So this particular module is quite dense. It includes a number of videos, video examples from the perspective of those who use AAC and their families. It includes statements from family members of those who use AAC and what presumed potential means to them. And this module is really intended, I usually take this one at a slightly slower pace so that we really have the opportunity to consider what these ideas mean and how they fit into our framework of understanding of how to best support individuals with unique needs. It is also a module that I think is important that there's a safe space so people really feel comfortable coming to their own understandings about how to understand this information. So I always start with this one because I do think that it is absolutely foundational for having rich and meaningful discussions on the other modules. So this quote really sums up presumed potential. It states, "There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly." And when it's delightful imagery, but it really captures this idea that we have no crystal balls and we have no insight into what an individual's upper potential may be. So here are a few key ideas that I would say I have acquired through my own learning about supporting those who use AAC and presuming potential. The first is to presume potential is to acknowledge that all individuals have the ability to learn, to communicate, and to contribute in their own way. And I love those three words, to learn, to contribute, and to communicate, because it really provides wide open doors for all the ways in which we can support individuals, both sort of academically, communicatively, and socially. Another key idea is that it means that we provide opportunities through creating accessible and inclusive spaces. And this piece is important because it means that we're always, it embraces the creativity that we might need to employ to think about how can we make this more meaningful, more accessible, recognizing what an individual is achieving and thinking about, gosh, what's next? How can I expand upon this opportunity? Ultimately, to presume potential or competence is to respect the value of human diversity. What a powerful statement that is, because not presuming competence is to actively do harm. So quality of life, I think, really sits at the center of this conversation. Presuming potential, when we do this, it creates richer and more meaningful interactions. It's kind of a given that this is true for those who use AAC. When we presume potential, when we value their learning, their communication, and their contribution, then that's a feeling. That's something that can be really internalized. But this is also true of communication partners. When we presume potential, when we go into an interaction or a lesson or an environment, and we just assume we hold value in all of the interactions that occur, then we have more fun. We see things more clearly and more thoughtfully, and we're able to act with more intent. So it improves not just the individuals, but also the quality of life of communication partners. And then it also provides a wonderful model of how to interact in respectful and meaningful ways to those who might observe what's happening. So that could include family, it could include staff members, it can include members of the community, but it improves perceptions about how we interact with individuals with disabilities and those with complex communication needs. Ability positive language is one way that we can do this. Ability positive language, is descriptive rather than presumptive. So you might say something like, he seeks out books and eats them, or he seeks out books and tears them, or he seeks out books and tosses them. And those are ways that kids explore books early on. But then if later we say he seeks out books and flips the pages but doesn't really attend to them, he seeks out books and looks at the pictures but not the words. In all of those examples, one might also say he's not a reader. But he's not a reader sends a very closed book message, whereas he seeks out books and it shows where a child might be in their experience of exploring books. So it's much more informative, and it also doesn't shut the door on that child's ability to be a reader. Ability positive language also recognizes potential areas of growth rather than lack of skills. So the power of yet is a conversation that I think is really, what's the word, relevant, really current. I see posters and bulletin boards in schools that talk about the power of yet to build a growth mindset in students. But this is really important in the language that we use as well. If we say he hasn't shown us that yet, then we are again leaving that we're showing that we see that the child has potential to achieve, rather than saying he can't do that, which really doesn't shape any expectations for that student. Another example of ability positive language is language that in which we own our responsibility in thinking outside the box. So we don't know all of the tips and tricks. None of us do. I think that our students teach us as much as we teach them, and oftentimes more, admittedly. So if we say she is complex, we are still figuring out how she learns. That again, it keeps a wide open door for this child is learning, and she has us a little stumped, but we're working on it, as opposed to she is low, which really puts the onus on the student to perform, rather than on those supporting that child to be creative in how we help her grow. So this is a wonderful quote from Carol Zangari of Practical AAC, and I think it really captures all of these components, this sort of wraparound nature of presuming potential. Perception drives expectation. Expectation then drives opportunity. Opportunity drives achievement, and then achievement drives perception. The next topic we're going to explore is motivate, and motivate is actually really closely tied to presuming potential. Motivation, we are familiar with categorizing motivation into intrinsic, which are those internal factors, and extrinsic, which are things that motivate us from the outside. So, kind of an everyday example is I hope you love your job. I know that I love my job. I love what I do, and the individuals I get to interact with, it's really, there's a lot of satisfaction in it. I appreciate the opportunity to grow, and I'm really interested in making those connections with people on their communication journeys. But at the end of the day, I do get a paycheck most of the time, not all the time. But that is also, something that, the days that I don't want to get up and get out of bed, I do because I know that that is coming. So we are all driven by this combination of intrinsic and extrinsic factors that shape our actions. There's a third component of this that I think is important to consider for our students who are often passive in their lives, and that is the motivation that is sort of inherent in having readiness. So when we have confidence and comfort with what is happening, we know what to anticipate. There's structure that allows things to be predictable. We know what's next. Then there's a certain amount of motivation, and I would say this is very closely tied to intrinsic. But I do like to parse it out a little bit because I think it merits some talking points. But for our students, these might often look like, oh, let me get this out of the way. Social interactions can be part of the intrinsic component. Extrinsic, we might start with edibles, or it might be screen time, it may be a toy or an other activity. And then we might use picture schedules or checklists or first then boards or other ways of helping to provide structure and shape environments so that kids are able to anticipate what's next and achieve. So as we explore these, I just want to put a little bit of, I want to put it in context. Extrinsic motivators are often really beneficial for kind of getting us started or opening the door. But once that door is open, we cannot rely on extrinsic motivators to shape communication and teach communication. We really need to look to what intrinsic factors what drives a child, what makes them tick, what makes them want to interact. Because ultimately, communication is an intrinsic experience, intrinsically motivated experience. So we need to make sure we're actually really focusing and on that intrinsic piece and capitalizing on that as we teach communication. Self-determination theory spells this out and sort of takes it to the next level. Self-determination theory posits that there are three basic human needs in order to feel like we are reaching our potential and thriving within that. One of these is competence, so that is our effectiveness. Autonomy, so that's the need to control our own lives, which again, being able to anticipate what's next is a piece of that. And then relatedness, and this is our belonging. And belonging and social interaction can be tied to, relate to our intrinsic motivation as well. So we want to shape self-determination through, by teaching communication and fostering communication, honoring communication. We are really supporting self-determination in that process. When we lack motivation, we see reduced quality experiences, and these are going to sound pretty familiar. There is often less learning when motivation is not when it's lacking. Disinterest in communication. So when communication devices become a compliance task, or they become quote unquote work, then then clearly motivation is lacking. Oftentimes, negative behaviors will increase when there's lack of motivation. It may be an escape behavior or and learned helplessness as well. So individuals become dependent upon others because they're not motivated to do it themselves. Karen Kangas is a brilliant OT, and I love her take on motivation. She is very passionate. She's an absolute joy to listen to if you ever have the opportunity to hear her speak. But she always says devices are not the activity. And to just kind of spell that out, she describes that motivation and purpose come before access. And when we hear the word access, we often think of alternative access, but she's really talking about any kind of access, the motivation to act, to do, to engage with. So novelty, not favorites, creates interest is one of the things that I've heard her say very often. So When we have favorites, we often have access to our favorites, and our favorites we enjoy them, but there isn't always motivation to talk about them because we have ready access to many of our favorites. But when things are different and interesting, then that's where we really get buy-in. Interest is a necessary component of engagement and therefore learning. And then this last one really again ties into that readiness piece. Teaching the beginning, the middle, and the end of an activity builds neural pathways that are necessary to facilitate learning and independence. So I think that she just spells this out so nicely. It's really easy to see how that ties into, building self-determination through communication. Our last topic in this section is accept multiple modalities. And we accept multiple modalities ultimately by validating all communicative attempts, whether they are verbal or nonverbal. And by doing this, we are teaching that communication is power. So unaided communication are all the ways that we express ourselves that don't require anything extra. So it's our words and our facial expressions, our body language, shaking our head, yes and no, what we look at, kind of, where we're looking. All of these are unaided forms of communication. Sign language is a symbolic form of unaided communication. Our aided communication tools are all the ways that we communicate that do require something extra. So oftentimes we think of this as what AAC is. AAC is actually all of these things, unaided and aided. But it includes things like picture symbols, communication boards and books, mobile communication apps, dedicated devices, light tech tools. It also includes some of our access hardware, such as eye gaze modules or scanning switches and that sort of thing. When we look at AAC and multimodal communication, what we're really looking for is what combination of tools come together to allow an individual to be effective, efficient, and socially appropriate in their interactions. And by socially appropriate, we mean that instead of a child climbing under the desk to avoid something, they're able to express, I want to stop, I need help, I need a break, and that kind of thing. So the modalities that we choose in given interactions varies based on a variety of factors. Some of these include what the communication partner, so who are they interacting with? How familiar is that person with their nonverbal language? What's the purpose of their communication? Are you making a request for something that's in the environment? Are you trying to share information about something that happened yesterday? And then what is the context of the environment? Like, are you outside, at the beach or somewhere where it's not convenient to have a technology-based tool? Do you need a low-tech tool, or do you need to use nonverbal means? Or are you in a learning environment where you want to have lots of modalities and lots of sort of visual supports to be as specific and concrete as possible? Here's the thing. It doesn't matter what modality a child uses. If they are verbal and have some verbal skills, we're going to honor their verbal communication. If they're using body language and gestures, we're going to honor their gestures. If they're using symbols or a communication board or a high-tech device, we're going to honor the messages that they express. And we are going to follow language development, and we are going to respond in such a way that we are building what their meaning and their understanding. So if a child gestures, we're going to label that gesture and we're going to repeat it. We might reframe it or extend it to let them know that we heard their message. We take that opportunity to model on their device so that they are learning another way, a concrete way, a more specific way, a way that's understood by a variety of communication partners to share that message. Oftentimes, if kids have some verbal skills, their verbal skills are single words or things that they've heard over and over that might be rote, and they're not very generative, or they're not extending their language and their utterance length. So we can accept it when a child says cookie, that they're requesting a cookie. And then we can use their device to say, oh, you want a cookie, or you like the cookie, or the cookies are yum, or the cookies are gone. So we can add information and really sort of flesh out that interaction by seizing the opportunity to use AAC to respond while still honoring the power of the communicative attempt that the child expresses. When we do this, we are developing a sense of I am. We are attributing meaning. And students with complex needs are often really passive participants. Activities happen to them and for them and around them. But when we give them feedback about the communicative attempts and what it means, we are showing them that they are influencing their environment. They can influence the actions of others. And it shows them that they are communicating and we are listening in all the ways that that may manifest. So just to recap, presume potential means to do no harm. Communication doesn't happen without purpose. Motivation is always a factor, and intrinsic motivation is what we're looking for really authentic and meaningful communication. Communication partners can also use AAC to model their side of the interaction as we honor all the modalities that an individual uses to communicate. Okay, our next topic is engage them. Engage them includes the module statements, more than questions, and response not required. Okay, and this is where it falls on our, oops, that went fast. This is where it falls on our MasterPal framework. And the idea behind statements more than questions is pretty simple. Life is not a test, and we need to vary the way that we interact to create a dynamic that is inviting and interesting and that we want to sustain. So the thing about questions is that when we are persistently questioned, we're always on, and we don't ever have, it can really interfere with a give and take and a back and forth. It can be exhausting and overwhelming. And in some instances, it can really cause a lot of pressure, unnecessary pressure. And that constant expectation of responding can also interfere with processing and comprehension because it may not always be easy to achieve an out. I think of simple, times when we're in a hurry and people are asking us a lot of questions and we respond and gosh, is it the most thoughtful response? Is it the most accurate way? Is it really what we meant to say? And that can be what happens when we're in a situation or in an interaction where we don't have a lot of autonomy over what's happening. So questioning also limits the quality of interactions. The only communicative function or communicative intent that we can demonstrate when we're questioned is responding. There aren't always opportunities for initiating, for changing the topic, for expressing something different. And ultimately, responding is only motivating if the content is sufficiently motivating. So we can find ourselves really kind of backed into a corner and stuck in an interaction that doesn't move forward very easily if we rely on questioning. So again, we're back to this language development piece. When we look at typical language development, adult interactions with young children are varied. There are some questions. To be clear, this is not a bid to eliminate questions from our interactions. They're important. It allows us to shift the control over to another person and gain information. But we also see in more balanced interactions, we see lots of comments, which are statements. We see repetition and restating of utterances, which are also statements. We see adults that extend upon children's utterances and offer more information, and those are also statements. So a couple of really concrete ways that we can do this. We're going to talk about just to give a little information about this module. This is perhaps the longest module because it has lots and lots of examples of ways that you can use statements to enrich interactions, to extend interactions, to vary interactions, and ultimately to capitalize on lots of opportunities to provide language input with AAC. So a couple of these we're just going to take a brief look at. One of them is think aloud. When we think aloud, we self-talk about what we are thinking or doing or feeling. We take our turn. It's kind of crazy, actually. Adults have a really hard time taking their turn when they're interacting with kids. They want to encourage kids to take turns over and over, or maybe facilitate turn taking between two kids, but adults themselves are not great at taking, in my observation. So I think it's important that we take a turn, that we show kids how to use language to take a turn, whether it's in a game or sharing materials or really related to lots of types of interactions. Commenting is also wonderful. Commenting is always appropriate. Commenting can be commenting on something funny, something crazy, something new. Commenting is available to us at all times. So commenting is a really powerful way to provide language input, and lots of social buy-in from commenting as well. And problem solving aloud. So when we problem solve aloud, we're thinking about, oh gosh, that's not what I meant to do, or oops, how did that happen? And giving kids language to talk about when things don't go well is also a really important part of developing their ability to process their world. So in some ways, you can think of it as just narrating what's happening, but then we do follow up with open-ended questions to provide them the opportunity to contribute to the interaction. Descriptive language is another example of a way that we can use statements more than questions. When we use descriptive language, we use describing words and action words. We use relational concepts. So those might be position words like in, on, under, or same and different. It also allows us to really dive into academic concepts and understanding extended, vocabulary. We do this sort of intuitively. If you have young kids in your life, chances are they've asked you, like, what does such and such mean? And when you reply, you probably use descriptive language to give a definition. So, if a child asks, like, what does habitat mean? My kids love Wildcrats, which is a show that is all about animals and how they're adapted to their environments. So, to describe that word, we might say something like it's a place where animals live. It's a place that they are able to grow and find food and protect themselves. And those are all much more common words, but it's very descriptive. It talks about it. So we are able to invite participation with when we use descriptive language, we can then invite participation from kids by asking questions that are valid and meaningful, and that they're able to answer with the vocabulary we've modeled related to the topic. So these two ideas are explored in great length in this module. But here are some examples. When we think aloud, and we're playing a puzzle, we might say, I put all the same color together. Turn it, it will go in. Those bold words are our core words, and those are the words that are readily available on most robust communication devices. In the second picture, mom is helping with food prep, and she reaches through and says, let me get that. I will put it on the table. So just self-talk. Think aloud while taking your turn might look something like this. Mom and the little boy on the left are playing with pegs and a board, and she could say, my turn, I will put it in, as she then takes her turn. And the family that's coloring together, mom might say, or a sibling might say, I like green, I will make a turtle. Problem solving aloud, again, really important. The language around this first picture, a broken vase, might be, uh-oh, that is not good. And then you might tell the child, stop, don't move. That's how you can help me, is to stay where you are. Let's make sure we get it all. So again, giving language to those times when things don't go great. A lesser problem might be that the popcorn is all gone. And you could say, where is all the popcorn? It is finished. Who will get more? With descriptive language, shared reading is a really easy and fun and accessible opportunity to use descriptive language. I think often we have a tendency to label. So we might point to the pictures as we say, girl, boy, tree, ladder, bridge, water. But it's so much more interesting to talk about what's happening in the picture. So use phrases like descriptive phrases in language. They play, he is high, up in the tree, climb it, go over, fast water. Then we're offering a lot more information and interest around the topic. So with statements more than questions, we do invite participation by asking open-ended questions. And these might be really general. What do you think about that? How does that make you feel? It also might be asking, specifically what was relevant to the child. Tell me something that happened. What did you learn about? Or asking them to think more specifically about how they could relate. What part do you find interesting? What are your ideas? Or what does that make you think of? Response not required dovetails really cleanly with statements more than questions. So these two bounce off of each other to really create such interactions that can really move forward, and really there's so much, they're fun and they're informative, and everyone feels like they can contribute as much as they want in these interactions. So response not required, again, it has to do with the pressure and the demands that are placed on an interaction and whether or not an individual is prepared and ready to respond. So I think that, again, we can all relate to this. There are those times when you are asked to give a response or asked to provide information, and you're not quite sure what to do with it at that moment. You might say something like, I'm going to need to think about that and get back to you. So there is a misconception that AAC is an expressive tool, but more specifically that it's only an expressive tool. But the fact of the matter is that AAC facilitates receptive as well as expressive language, and we do need to use it receptively in order to develop those expressive skills. The next part of this is this challenge that expectation of a response is inherent in classroom discourse, and also, sometimes it's just the expectation within an interaction. However, ample modeling over time and across contexts without expectation of a response is inherent to language development. So when we recognize and when we really embrace the idea that statements allow us to provide lots of language input, and that not requiring a response takes off the pressure, then we can provide that ample modeling over time that is needed to develop language. So the pro tip here is that you don't want to back yourself into a conversational corner. You want to ask those open-ended questions where the child has so many options about how they can respond, and you can attribute meaning to that. You want to use expectant pauses. So these are just long pauses where you're waiting, and expectant looks where you are anticipating and perhaps leaning in and letting them know, it's your turn. What do you have to say? I'm listening. It's also a time when you might observe and describe the body language or the situational factors and determine if you need to give an out, and be okay with giving an out. When you give an out, you might say something like, you don't seem to have an opinion on this one. Let's check with a friend. Or, I can see that you're thinking. I think you might be looking at. So perhaps to try to encourage or recognize their efforts, and then you can figure out what makes sense to fill in that blank. Is it more time, or is it more support? You might also offer your own opinion. I think that is scary, or funny, or interesting. You could also say something along the lines of, you don't seem interested in this. Let's try something different. So recognizing when an out may be needed, and then figuring out a gracious way to do that is an important part of response not required. These two modules together, the feedback that I often get is that this is really instrumental in shifting the way that people think about themselves as modelers. It gives them something really concrete to do that's actionable, to shift a behavior that can really increase the amount of modeling and language input they're able to provide. So I think that this quote really reflects that. Change is purposeful. Being an effective communication partner or AAC facilitator is not intuitive, and it often requires us to change long established and unconscious ways of communicating. So just to recap, we want to be a pal, think aloud, to comment, to describe, to explain and extend, and then we're going to ask valid and meaningful questions to provide an opportunity for responding, but not require it, because communication is inherently motivating, and if it isn't, then it's compliance. So we want to give an out. We're going to model without expectation of a response, but give lots of language input around that, so we are building those skills. All right, the next topic we are going to look at is shape the interaction. This includes the modules wait time, appropriate prompting, and let the child lead. And this is where it falls on our Master Pal framework. All right, wait time. Wait time is a really key component in learning. And this is why wait time is a good way to think about it and understand its purpose is to think of it as think time. When wait time is provided, kids are given the opportunity to fully think through what they're being asked to respond about. And that thinking is part of the learning. So when thinking is short-circuited, then the learning is short-circuited. And for our kids with complex needs, this becomes even more important. So there's a great video that captures the role of wait time in a general education classroom. And it emphasizes that everything about the quality of the interaction, both for the student and the teacher, is increased when wait time is given. So what I think is really compelling, there's an article that's linked here at the bottom, but it talks about how 3 seconds of wait time increases lots of characteristics related to learning in positive ways. And that increase is from a second and a half. So from a second and a half to 3 seconds, there's a lot of growth and improvement. For our kids with complex needs, however, it's very likely that even more wait time is needed. And 10 seconds of wait time or even 5 seconds can feel like an eternity, but oftentimes our kids might need 15 or 30 or more of wait time. It supports their processing. It might support their vision, so their ability to visually attend and take in and process what they should be responding about. It might support their coordination and motor planning, and for some kids, it's all of these. I have a great video that I unfortunately don't have permission to share, but I'll just briefly describe it to you. A child is a young boy, I think he's about 3rd grade. He's listening to a switch adapted music on a switch adapted radio player. And he is loving it. He's jamming out. The music goes off, and he has to activate the switch to turn it back on. And he waits for 55 seconds, according to the timeline at the bottom of the video. And the whole time, his body seems very quiet. But if you look really closely, you can see a little bit of finger movement, a little bit of like shifting of his body. His eyes start to rest on the switch on his tray. And at 55 seconds, his arm reaches back in this very full motion, and he comes down square on the device. He really needed that time. He needed it for the motor planning and the coordination. I think processing-wise, he understood pretty quickly what he needed to do, but it took that time in order for him to be able to execute. So as we wait and observe, noticing that changes in behavior can indicate that the brain is thinking, the body is thinking, so to speak, in order to show learning and participation. So when we think of it as when we recognize that it is think time, for some kids it's also really important that the waiting around that think time is quiet. Talking, touching, moving can be distracting, and for some kids it can reset their wait time. So if a child requires 30 seconds of wait time, and during that time there's continued prompting. What do you think? Where is it? Look at your device. Go ahead. It's your turn. Answer. In that time, all of those prompts can actually reset their wait time. So every time a prompt is given, the 30 seconds starts over. It's very student specific, so you really do have to get to know your kids, get to know your child, and figure out what does wait time look for them. Does it vary by communication partner, by activity? Motivation is often a factor as well. Appropriate prompting is the next conversation, and we use a prompting scaffold success, and it's really important that we do this thoughtfully and appropriately so as not to undermine our efforts. A prompt is a supportive level of cueing to move one to action, and the goal here is to foster ownership of communication skills so that kids understand that their unique voice is being heard. Kate Ahern developed this really lovely prompting hierarchy that is very specific to AAC. And we need to just, before we start with a prompting hierarchy, recognize that prompts should only be used as much as is necessary and only for as long as necessary. Prompting hierarchy should be faded out as quickly as possible. But a couple of elements that I think are really important. This prompting hierarchy starts with the use of aided language. So recognizing that there has to be a lot of language in the environment before we can really support elicited responses. Also, motivation is key. We don't respond about things that aren't important to us, aren't interesting to us, so motivation is an important part. And then wait time is described at every level of the prompting hierarchy. So as we move from expectant pauses to indirect and direct cues, and some indirective models, some suggestions. We provide wait time at every level so that kids can have the opportunity to respond. A prompting hierarchy, the way that we use this is we start with a most support to a least amount of support when we're introducing a new skill. This gives positive practice and helps teach, helps with the learning. But once a skill once the expectation of a skill or once it is established, then we want to flip that and we want to use the least to most because that gives kids the opportunity to do as much as possible on their own without prompting. And then we meet them where they are and help them the rest of the way. Prompting dependence is something we absolutely want to avoid. It emerges from a mismatch of the prompting level mismatches the student's understanding or skill level. So we don't want to provide too much prompting. Using wait time appropriately as part of this. And then again, interactions which elicit compliance and not communication can also emerge from or also result in prompt dependence. A word about hand underhand, most level of many prompting hierarchies, you'll see physical support or hand over hand. And I wanted to just take a moment to differentiate the difference. Hand over hand can be very intrusive. It is the most intrusive. Hand over hand, if somebody does that to you, chances are you are going to pull back. If you're pulling back, you're not learning. Or you're going to become passive and be like, hey, they got it, and you're not learning. So we use hand underhand as a way to demonstrate respect and be less pushy. Hand underhand gives control to the learner and encourages their participation, but doesn't require it. So when I do hand underhand, I get my hand ready for modeling and I invite the child to put their hand on top. I often say hop on as my cue, but they can pull off at any time. That's okay. I still have their attention. They've still observed and perhaps gotten some, perhaps a little bit of a motor engagement in that as well. So we want to wait expectantly and recognize how important wait time is as we're encouraging AAC use and also use that as a tool to gauge our own appropriate use of a prompting hierarchy. Let the Child Lead is a module that really addresses engagement and meeting the child in where they are. Learning emerges from meaningful social emotional experiences is a statement that was made to me that when I first heard it, it really encapsulated so much of the passion that I have for teaching and communication. So this is meeting a child in their space is the first step in building relationships and fostering communication to support learning. We need to honor the fact that many children travel on this journey from being preoccupied with things in the environment, either out of preference or out of sensory seeking needs. And that might somewhere in there, we can figure out how to lead them to joint attention. But recognizing that kids may travel this journey from preoccupation to joint attention before they become early emergent communicators, and certainly before they demonstrate ownership of learning, communicating, and being a social partner. When we come to the table with an agenda of making them that social partner before we've recognized where they are in that journey, it can be difficult to figure out how to support them. So this module explores a variety of strategies that allow us to recognize when a child is at different stages of learning and how to get them to a place of joint attention so that we can then dovetail into supporting their communication. So just a snapshot of what this looks like. Getting on the child's level, not low, but actually on their level, literally eye to eye, can play a big part in making them feel safe and not intimidating in an interaction. Responding relevantly to what they're doing. So commenting on their actions or joining them in their actions in the way that they are playing rather than having our own way of doing it. Shifting our attention when they shift theirs shows them and that we don't have an agenda and we're not going to make them do anything and can really be instrumental in building trust. And also allowing them to explore or experiment in their own way. We as grown-ups often have ideas about how toys should be played or how activities should go, but leaving the outcome wide open and letting kids do it in their own way can help us on our journey. Learning can only happen when a child is interested. And I think that in addition to being interested, but feel safe in that environment and in that interaction. If he's not interested, it's like throwing marshmallows at his head and calling it eating. So there's a lot of humor in that, which I think really does a nice job of getting the point across. But I think ultimately we just need to recognize that our idea of what is interesting and a child's idea of what is interesting may not be the same. And we have to sometimes surrender our own agenda and meet them where they are in order to bring them to a place where we can then access their availability for learning and communicating. So just a recap, we want to be a patient pal. Think time in the terms of wait time is really important for upholding the quality of instruction, both receptively and expressively. Motivate and wait at all levels of the prompting hierarchy, making sure that we're employing a prompting hierarchy effectively ensures that we're not undermining our own efforts. And it's important to be present. When we let the child lead, we establish those engaging social emotional contexts around which they feel safe and valued. And from these experiences, we have the opportunity to support learning. We are in the home stretch. We're in the last topic, and it is synthesize Master Pal. And we're going to look at engage naturally, and then we're going to just take a moment to consider how we might plan and prioritize what is next for Master Pal for you. So I'm going to give just a moment, and if you want to pause this video and quiz yourself and see how many Master Pal topics do you recall from the videos that we have looked at today. All right, so if you are back, we'll go ahead and take a look at these. See how you did. Motivate, accept multiple modalities, statements more than questions, time, both language development and wait time. Engage naturally is the one that we're up against, we're about to explore, so you might not have gotten that one. And response not required, that is our master. And then for PAL, we have presume potential, appropriate prompting, and let the child lead. Okay, so this is where we are. Engage naturally is really this module is sort of based on this key idea that we want to engage in communicative interactions that are person-focused and responsive to the activity and the environment. So this is really about setting our agenda aside and seeing how can we be engaging, motivating, naturalistic in the way we interact. There are lots of general topics that are explored, which have been touched on in the other modules as well. So again, this is just a snapshot. We'll take a look at a couple of these. There are slides that look at communication opportunities and how to provide those. Semantics, how the language we use impacts the message we send. Of course, language development, and then emotional competence and self-determination. So one of the examples of ways that we can create communication opportunities, I think some of this I wanted to provide some really concrete ideas about what can I do in my life to start to make AAC more of a habit. So one of these is to have low-tech AAC everywhere. Some families or school teams benefit from using a lanyard, and I really like to have a core board on one side and then a social board on the other so that we have a couple different ways of access to different kinds of vocabulary. You can also engineer the environment by providing low-tech boards laminated, maybe on the door to go outside or near a child's bed, in the bathroom, on the refrigerator. Also, making a plan for wet and messy activities can be really useful. Low-tech is really good for this, or whether it's sand play or water play or face paint, or finger paint and those kinds of things. Just thinking ahead can allow you to consider, gosh, how can I include AAC in this activity? Thinking about the language that we use and whether or not it focuses on communication. Sometimes the language that we use is really geared towards motor compliance tasks. So for instance, if you say, tell me, rather than hit the button, then you're focusing on communication. If you say, I want to know what you think about this, rather than find Monday, you're really focusing on communication. Also, the way that you respond when there's a disruption or things don't seem to quite make sense. If you say, that's interesting, or can you tell me more later, or you're full of surprises, values the communicative attempt rather than just kind of shutting it down by saying something like, that's not the right answer. When we engage naturally, we also recognize that different kids need different things. There are different drivers and different things that make kids tick, but that's really fundamental into supporting their learning and their communication needs. Like I said earlier, I have two boys, 6 and 8. They're really different kids. So the way that I support them as individuals is different. I have one son that is really he loves structure, he loves having a sense of purpose, and he loves being able to have control over what he does and how he uses things and what choices he makes. So he really is driven by that. My other son is also very social, but he is much more driven by having opportunities for being affirmed. Um, he's much more laid back. So understanding how kids are different and being responsive to that in the ways that we interact with them, provide opportunities for them, can be so important in fostering natural engagement. I think it's also important that we have conversations about emotional competence. Our students with complex needs, complex bodies, um, we giving language to emotions is an important part of development for all kids. And many of our students are dealing with, perhaps things that are even more weighty, things like exclusion or lots of medical situations where they may or may not fully understand what's happening. So giving kids language related to emotions and dealing with emotive events can be so instrumental in their development. There is a research article that is linked in this module that looks at how we can kind of shape AAC tools to meet these emotional competence needs of students. And it talks about a 3-step process. And one of these is identifying an emotion. Often when kids are frustrated or upset, we might say to them, tell me how you feel, and give them a board or open up their communication display to their feelings. And the fact of the matter is many kids don't make connections between what all of that means. In fact, some kids will choose happy when it's clear that that's not the case because that's what they've always done, or that's what they've always been encouraged to do, or that's always, what comes up in class. So identifying the emotion by describing it to them can be a really important first step. So saying, you look sad or mad or frustrated, gives them that first entry, that first word to start to unpack where they are. And then we can use language to talk about it. So the child may be able to contribute to this or they may not. You might be able to ask some questions, but you might have to make a best guess. You might need to reflect on the situation and use their tool to do so. I wonder if someone was mean to you. I wonder if it didn't happen the way you thought it would. And then we can start to process that situation. We might give information about why it happened. We might make a plan for how we might do it next time, or what would make it better in this moment. So this process and using a child's AAC to work through this process it's a cumulative effect. It has to happen over time. But this is one of the things that is also discussed in quite a bit of length, actually, in Engage Naturally. As we engage naturally, again, we continue to value communicative attempts and attribute meaning to them. And in doing so, we develop that sense of I am. We build those meaningful relationships related to communicating and learning, and we validate contributions, which fosters meaningful relationships. We continue to invite participation and engagement so that we have an ongoing dynamic. We also build self-esteem, which is really necessary for self-determination and self-actualization. And these are important building blocks in achieving a high quality of life. So as we engage naturally and we use AAC to do it, we attribute meaning. We are building so much more than just a vocabulary, but we're really building that sense of self and that sense of belonging that we all need in order to achieve in our own worlds. Whew, so much information, so many good talking points and discussions. I imagine you're probably fairly overwhelmed at this point, and that's okay. We are going to just take a deep breath for a moment, and the next few slides are going to give you the opportunity to reflect on your learning and start to think about what is next for you. Again, this is just an overview, so there's a lot more to explore. First off, just by virtue of being here, you are doing something that makes you a fantastic communication partner. So kudos to you. I want you to think about what that is. You can turn to a partner and tell a partner, pause this video if you need more time, but just think about and share, what are you currently doing that makes you awesome? Then I want you to think about one tidbit, one bit of information, one statement, one idea, one skill that you are going to use, a mindset shift even, that is going to make you a better communication partner. All right. Next up, just to kind of culminate some of these ideas, because perhaps you have lots of things rattling around in your brain, I want you to just take a moment to jot down as many ideas as you can related to MasterPal. What are the things that come to you that you're recalling from this? So just in 1 minute, let your ideas flow from one to the next and jot down what you can. Pause if you need to. All right, after you've done that, I want you to circle 2 or 3 ideas that have most resonated with you. What 2 or 3 things are you going to be thinking about tomorrow or next week? And then think about what action you are going to take to be a better communication partner. One actionable thing. And you might be thinking about yourself, or you might be thinking about, depending on what hat you wear, how you're going to support others to be a better communication partner of those who use AAC. So this is just a really quick exercise to get you thinking about what you've learned, what it means, and then what you can do with it. There's, I'm sure, much more in-depth discussions that can be had around this, but I hope that in some way you're able to synthesize and figure out how to move forward with MasterPal. Ultimately, this is the piece we want to keep in mind. This is from Rachel Langley. She's an AAC specialist who makes fantastic visuals to capture these really key ideas around communication. But the goal is not to create an echo, but to hear an authentic voice. May we always keep that in mind as we endeavor to be a MasterPal. Thank you so much for your time. There's the link to the training module if you need that again. And have a great day. Thank you.
Gente, espero que todos tenham gostado da palestra da Tab. A Tab já está aqui com a gente. Ela já entrou, ela está acompanhando já a parte da palestra. Eu vou pedir agora para quem tiver perguntas, então, mandar pelo chat. Eu vou deixar o meu chat aberto aqui para poder acompanhar. Eu vou fazer até o seguinte, eu vou conectar também pelo meu computador para eu poder acompanhar o chat por aqui. Gente, se vocês quiserem abrir câmeras, enfim, para todo mundo se ver. Só um minuto, gente, só para eu poder abrir o chat aqui, para eu poder acompanhar. Eu não sei se a Tabby, de repente, quer dar uma palavra para vocês. Hi, Tabby. Do you want to say something live for your audience?
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope that you've enjoyed MasterPal, and it's exciting for me that it's being so widely shared. Carol, do you need to translate?
Yeah, so a Tabby agradeceu a presença de todo mundo, ela está muito feliz de estar aqui pelo convite e ela está muito feliz também dessa presença tão grande aqui de tantas pessoas e do MasterPal ter alcançado tanta gente. Go on, Tabby.
I was just going to say, you should know that I didn't set out to create this as is. I just set out to organize my ideas and kind of pull things together to support the teams that I worked with. So the fact that so many people are benefiting from it is really very humbling. And I'm just so appreciative to you, Carol, for putting the effort forth to make it shareable.
Então, ela que, na verdade, ela criou o MasterPal para organizar as ideias dela e que ela fica muito feliz de ver que o MasterPal, na verdade, né, ele transcendeu fronteiras, outras pessoas já usaram o treinamento e ela agradeceu, então, o nosso esforço aí de estar traduzindo e estar fazendo os módulos. Well, Tabby, we are so grateful that you made this available for everyone. It was great. We had so much fun over the last 11 weeks meeting every week to get together and go through the modules and share our experiences. I said I was facilitating the modules, but I was learning along with everyone else, because I think that we always learn from other people's experience. So we have to thank you. You have nothing to thank us. We hope that translating Master Paul and making it available, we will even reach more and more people. It's so necessary to, bring good practices into AAC implementation. So it is an honor to have you here tonight, giving some of your time to answer all our questions and just your insights on everything. I'm going to translate it to them. Então, eu agradeci, a Tab, né? Ela agradeceu a gente. Na verdade, eu acho que a gente que tem que agradecer ela de ter feito o MasterPal e de ter disponibilizado o MasterPal de forma gratuita, né? Para todo mundo. I'm going to start with the questions because I don't want to take all your time. So I'm going to start. So someone sent me a question. I think they are not here anymore. Eu vou começar, então, a fazer as perguntas, gente. Eu estou vendo que vocês já mandaram algumas perguntas aqui no chat. Eu vou começar por uma pergunta que já tinham me enviado antes. Eu acho que é uma pessoa até que saiu, ela não está aqui agora. So, the question is, I'll say it in Portuguese and then I'll translate it to you. A respeito, é uma pergunta da Mônica. Ela diz, a respeito do seu comentário sobre combinação de palavras na frase que mudam o sentido do que se quer dizer, o uso das cores relacionada à organização sintática e não à localização do símbolo propriamente dito é, de fato, um facilitador? So the question is, in regards to your comment about combining words in a phrase and how they change the meaning of what we want to say, the use of colors related to the syntactic organization of the symbols, and not the localization of the symbols, as said. Is it a facilitator? Do you think it facilitates the use by AAC users having the colors regarding...
the color coding?
Yes.
Okay. This is actually a point of discussion. So I won't claim to be an expert on this, but I'll give you sort of kind of where I am with thinking about it. And that is this. It is thought by some that the colors are a distraction, because if a child has a favorite color, they might choose the color over the symbol.
Okay.
So I think that if that appears to be the case, I would avoid color coding. However, if it doesn't seem to interfere, for communication partners, I think it can be a really valuable cue for us to know how things are organized. So I think it's a little bit of a case by case, but I know that Karen Erickson at University of North Carolina avoids using color coding.
Color coding, okay.
Because of the interference.
Ok, então a resposta da Tab sobre a questão de usar aquela codificação das cores, né, na organização sintática do vocabulário, ela diz que ela não é uma expert nesse assunto, mas ela sabe que existe uma discussão sobre o uso ou não das cores. A Karen Erickson, que é da Universidade da Carolina do Norte, Chapel Hill, ela não recomenda o uso da codificação por cor, porque ela acha que pode ser uma distração, mas ela acha que então a gente tem que avaliar caso a caso, e se a gente vê que é uma distração para a criança e que a criança busca as cores favoritas dela, ao invés de se guiar pelo símbolo, que então a gente pode, é indicado retirar essa codificação por cor, mas que se não for um distrativo, né, uma distração para a criança, que ela acha que isso ajuda o parceiro de comunicação para entender a organização do vocabulário dentro do sistema.
Can I just add to that?
Yes.
One thing that I've done is by way of compromise is I used to saturate the whole button so that the whole button was colored, and now I just do the border.
Like
so the symbol might be white or just a light gray, but the border is colored so that it doesn't pop as colorful, but it still provides a little bit of a cue to the partner.
Ok. Ela disse, então, que uma forma de chegar num meio termo aí é ao invés de usar o botão todo com o fundo da cor da organização, né, desse código da cor para a organização sintática, ela usa só a borda colorida, porque assim dá uma dica da função sintática daquela palavra sem se destacar tanto em relação ao símbolo. Let me see the other questions. So, a pergunta da Raquel, né? Então, se a criança me pede algo usando gestos e eu quero modelar esse pedido, eu dou o objeto pedido e modelo na sequência. So, Rachel has a question. So she's asking if the child asks for something, requests something using gestures, and I want to model this request on her system. Do I give the object first and then I model what she's asking?
I think the key here is to maintain the child's interest. So if you can pause for a moment and model and the child's still interested and understands the connection, then if you can create that pause, that can be beneficial. If the child isn't going to wait and isn't going to pay attention to anything until they get what they're asking for, then I would do that and then pause. So I think it has to do with the attention of the child. And that will be different from child to child. And the types of things that I would model might be something like want or let me get it for you. Because those are usually on the core page. So those are right away words as opposed to having to navigate, which takes more time.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes. So, então a resposta dela é que eu sei que Raquel você entendeu, eu vou traduzir então para o resto da nossa plateia aqui. Então, a resposta dela é que depende da criança. Se a criança aguenta esse momento de pausa entre você dar o objeto e antes fazer a modelagem, então você pode então modelar e depois entregar o objeto, mas se a criança realmente ela se perde ali nessa comunicação, então você entrega o objeto primeiro e depois você pode modelar no sistema da criança. Okay, so next question. So Regina, I'll say the question in Portuguese first. A Regina, primeiro ela está agradecendo a Tab e a mim por compartilhar o Masterpal com todos. Eu achei que você tivesse uma pergunta. Sorry, it's not a question. So Regina, she's a university professor in SLP in Brazil, and she's thanking you for making Masterpal available. And it was fantastic. So Regina was the one who reached out to you on an email asking about the model, the use of the word model.
Okay.
To refer to, you speak your words. So just so you know who she is, she's just saying thank you to both of us so much. So we have another question from Rachel. A pergunta da Raquel, então, é se... she just said the question in English. So there's someone saying that the color coding is important for them. Let me go to questions here. So many images to people. Okay.
I think there's a really long one.
Nathalie Goldoni, eu vou fazer a pergunta em português e aí eu vou repetir em inglês para a Tab. Ela tem trabalhado com muitas pessoas com paralisia cerebral e autismo. Ela participou do Masterpal, está agradecendo pelo trabalho. A dúvida dela é: quando você insere muitas imagens para pessoas com paralisia cerebral, se eles têm dificuldade no foco da visão, or even some do not recognize and take time to learn the symbol. Ou se algum tem algum... Nath, você quer abrir seu microfone e fazer a pergunta em português? Nathalie? So I'll say the question in English, and I'll see if she asks.
I actually see this one. Is it the one that's posted in the chat?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. It's in the chat.
So this really gets into some of the I don't know, sort of the marriage of the art and the science of supporting AAC. I think that alternative access is something that becomes very appropriate for people who have cerebral palsy, and even for some with autism to a much lesser extent. But I think we're really looking at, if you have a child with a body that's just very complex and limited, then partner-assisted scanning becomes a go-to strategy for me. So partner-assisted scanning is where you give an array of choices and then you have them indicate that's the one I want. And then I'll keep going, but I don't know how much you want to translate at a time.
Ok, so então ela diz que para pessoas com paralisia cerebral e para algumas pessoas com autismo, mas numa extensão um pouco menor no autismo, né, o acesso alternativo, né, ou usar o eye gaze, né, a varredura, ou o escaneamento, né, a varredura auditiva ou varredura visual, pode ser uma forma melhor deles acessarem essa comunicação. Go on, Tabby.
Okay, so I'm not sure what is available in your language, but like pod books are a strategy that we use that provide lots of access because you use a scanning technique. That kind of scanning is also available on high-tech devices. It takes a long time and there's a learning curve, but it gives access to robust communication. So there is a difference in teaching it, but it still provides the same opportunities.
Ok. Então ela falou, and we do have pod books available, thank goodness.
Okay.
Ela falou então que o pod é uma opção excelente para os acessos alternativos, porque ele já tem os livros prontos, né, para varredura visual, varredura auditiva, e também existe a varredura, né, o escaneamento, o eye gaze, o controle ocular na alta tecnologia. Dá mais trabalho, existe uma curva de aprendizado para esse tipo de acesso, mas dessa forma, pessoas que têm necessidades mais específicas de acesso, elas conseguem ter acesso, então, a um vocabulário robusto. Next question.
Oh, I'm not finished.
Oh, okay, so go on.
Another piece of this question is related to the visual symbols. And I think one thing that we do need to remember is that visual symbols they're not memorized, they're learned in context. So kids learn the words that are most meaningful to them. Individuals learn to use those words that, you know, when we model language, they give back to us those words that have the most meaning and the most power. So they don't necessarily have to know exactly what it looks like, but they need to know where it's located or what the pattern or the path is for getting to it. Or from an array of choices in a meaningful context, they have to know which one gets them that end result. So context is really important in teaching. And this, in my experience, this becomes really evident with kids who have cortical visual impairments. You know, we provide them access to language, but we have to scaffold or support how they may visually access it. So it's such a hard question to answer because there's a million variables.
Okay.
But that in context is important as far as symbol learning.
Então, para complementar aqui, então, né, a questão que a Nath pergunta aqui, da questão de como apresentar essas figuras, ela diz que o mais importante é apresentar esses símbolos dentro de um contexto, né? A gente não memoriza os símbolos, a gente aprende eles dentro de um contexto e a criança vai usar os símbolos que são mais significativos para ela. So I'm going to give a hint here from my experience and I'll then translate it to English to you. Então, eu vou dar um exemplo da Liora, né? Eu não tenho foto do cachorro, que é a obsessão da Liora, que está ali atrás, o Peanut. Eu não tenho a foto dele no sistema da Liora, eu só tenho a escrita e a Liora sabe acessar aquele botão porque ela aprendeu ele num contexto e é uma comunicação que ela gosta muito de fazer, é chamar o cachorro, né? Então, eu acho que muito isso que ela está falando é muito importante, né? A gente não memoriza o símbolo, a criança não está memorizando esses símbolos, ela está aprendendo dentro de um contexto. So what I'm telling is that, so on my daughter's system, I don't have pictures of people or our dogs. I only have the name written. And she learned it really fast because it's really motivating to her. So she's not memorizing the symbol. She is learning how to access it through the pathways in her system to access that name, and it's just the letters, and she knows we used to have 2 dogs. One passed away this year, but we still have both names. And she goes to the right one every time because she uses them so much. It's so motivating to her. It's so meaningful that she uses them all the time. And she's very, very like certain of what she wants, and she goes to those symbols.
Great example.
Yeah, so we don't even have a drawing there to help her memorize, just the word, and she's good with it. Okay, so we have a question about model. A pergunta da Anne Coutinho, então, desculpa a pergunta leiga, mas estou chegando agora a esse universo da comunicação alternativa. O que significa exatamente o modelar? So she's asking what model means exactly. I know this is not one of our Master PAL participants of the modules. She's new here, so maybe that's why she doesn't know what model is, because you emphasizes it really well through the modules. But can you give your answer?
Sure. Modeling language is the natural process through which all languages learn. So when kids who develop speech and are typically developing, they learn to use words because we speak to them. So when kids are before they're even born, we're talking to them, and we talk to them from the moment they're born. We talk to them when they're, we just talk to them. We comment, we describe, we tell about what's happening around them. We tell them how cute they are. And that's modeling language. And then when kids give us their first words, there's this TED Talk that looked at this crazy language development person put cameras in his home just before his first child was born. And they recorded every interaction the child had for his first year of life. And then when his first word was water, and they mapped back all the times that he heard water in his first year of life. And it was tons. I mean, it was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So that's how kids learn language. They learn it from the input in their environment. And this is why kids in Portugal, in a Portuguese speaking country are going to learn Portuguese. And the kids in my family learned English because that's what I speak, and nobody gave them a manual or signed them up for lessons. It's just what they're exposed to in their environment. So all languages learn through modeling. That is how language development happens. So when we model with AAC, we touch the symbols on the device to reflect our messages. And it's not an exact match early on because we've got this extra layer that makes it more complex. So we model words, but rather than modeling full, complete sentences and ideas from the get-go, we start with 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe up to 5 words. And over time, we expand that, just as the way that we talk to an infant is different than the way we talk to a toddler and a school-age child and an adult child that comes back to visit on the holidays. So we're responsive to what the child is, has to contribute to the conversation in terms of their development. So we use AAC to speak to the child to support that language development process.
Então, Anne, a resposta da Tab é que modelar aqui, né, é a gente dar modelo de linguagem, né? Uma criança típica, ela aprende a falar, né, ouvindo a gente falar durante um ano e meio até ela falar a primeira palavra dela, né? Então, com comunicação alternativa não é diferente. O que a gente fala quando a gente modela a comunicação alternativa é que a gente está apertando os símbolos que representam aquilo que a gente está falando, né? Na comunicação alternativa isso parece um pouco diferente do que no desenvolvimento típico, porque a gente começa primeiro apertando 1 ou 2 símbolos e a gente vai crescendo o número de símbolos que a gente vai apertando, à medida que a linguagem da criança também cresce. Mas isso é um pouquinho relacionado a como a gente fala com um bebê e depois como a gente fala com uma criança pequena, uma criança já na idade escolar e com um adulto, né? A gente tem uma forma diferente para falar com cada faixa etária de criança e adolescente, adulto. Mas isso, então, seria compatível ao número de símbolos que a gente está modelando no sistema, mas quando a gente fala em modelar, então, é a gente apertar no sistema, mostrar, né, indicar os símbolos que a gente está oralizando, né? O que a gente fala, então, a gente aperta os símbolos no sistema da criança. We have a question here. Então, uma pergunta, acesso aqui eu vou, acho que é a Cândida, né? Ela pergunta a opinião da Tab sobre ter 2 tablets. O que ela recomenda? Se vale a pena ter 2 tablets ou não. So, the question is, what is your opinion regarding to have two iPads, let's say, one for the kid, one to model? Do you think that's necessary? Do we have to have 2 iPads? Is it good? Is it bad? What's your opinion?
I think that if you have the resources for that, that's great. I don't think that's realistic for everybody, even most. So I think that there's other ways you can get around it. I use low-tech communication a lot. I am a huge fan of low-tech communication boards because they're great backups. Batteries are going to die, equipment's going to break. You need another way to say it anyway. So I think that those are a reasonable alternative. I think too, like if you just even have the home screen of a device, then you can have it in lots of different environments. And if you are trying to get somebody else to buy in, another family member, a neighbor, low tech is less intimidating, so it's great to have it on the iPad. If you have 2 devices in your home that a partner as well as your child can share, that is awesome. I wouldn't discourage it at all. But I also think that we can think outside the box and consider other ways to do it if that's not a resource that's available to you.
Então, a resposta da Tab é que se você tem condição de ter 2 iPads, sim, ela acha que vale a pena, mas que se também não é uma realidade na sua família, que tudo bem, você então pode ter uma prancha em baixa tecnologia, ou a primeira página, né, a página principal do dispositivo do seu filho impressa e você usar aquilo para modelar. Nem sempre é possível e a gente também precisa ter outras ferramentas além dos dispositivos, né, seja um iPad ou um dispositivo dedicado, mas que se existe a condição de ter 2 dispositivos que sim, ela acha que vale a pena. Então tem uma pergunta agora da Raquel, né? Ela pergunta se tem alguma dica para usar comunicação alternativa com crianças bilíngues. O filho dela se comunica em inglês na escola e em casa ainda responde e se comunica em inglês, mas ela fala português com ele. Se ela deve modelar em inglês ou português. E você tem alguma dica para o uso de dispositivos de comunicação alternativa para crianças bilíngues? So, the question is on the chat. So she's asking if you have any tips for the use of AAC devices with bilingual children. Her son communicates in English at school. At home, he still answers and communicates in English, but she speaks with him in Portuguese. Should she model it in English or Portuguese? Do you have any tips about the use of AAC devices with bilingual children?
I feel a little out of my league on this one, I will confess. I do think that it's important to honor the native language of a family and provide a child the opportunity to learn that language and have access to that language, especially if that's the language of tradition in your home or the language that is related to your the way that you celebrate and the way that you commemorate your heritage. So I don't have a lot of experience working with bilingual families, so I don't know that I have a very specific answer to that.
Okay.
But it makes, I do think it's important to be respectful.
I've done some research on that one too. Então, Raquel, você já entendeu aí a resposta dela, né? Eu vou então dizer que você pode procurar, Raquel, alguma coisa da Glória Soto. A Glória Soto tem algumas publicações sobre o uso de comunicação alternativa com crianças bilíngues. One second, Lili. Eu tenho, então, a minha experiência é que eu tenho um livro pod impresso em português e eu tenho o iPad em inglês e um livro em inglês também. Give me a second, Lili. You can sit here with me. You want some glue? So So I'm sending her. So I know that Gloria Soto has some research on bilingual AAC users, and that she can search for that. And here, my experience. So what I did, we started AAC before we moved to the US. So I have a pod book that I translated to Portuguese, and I also have the same pod book in English, and we use the iPad in English. So we make a little mix of everything, you know. Since Leora is my daughter, she is an English learner. Still, we focus a lot on modeling in English so she can grow her vocabulary in English, but we still give her model in Portuguese, and her pod books are pretty much the same. So we hope that she can just, you know, when she's speaking Portuguese to people, like when family is over, that she can move from one system to the other with ease and use both to communicate. I'll go to the next question. Quando introduzimos, então, pergunta da Juliane Tozin, quando introduzimos um tablet com um aplicativo de comunicação alternativa, sempre ouvimos que devemos iniciar a usar ao mesmo tempo em todos os ambientes, casa, escola, etc. Se a Tab concorda. So the question is, when we're introducing AAC, usually the recommendation is that we should start using it at the same time in all environments, so home, school, and therapists. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that language is not an activity. It's not for the speech room. It's not for therapy. It's not for language arts. It is part of every interaction. And, you know, one of the best indicators of success in developing a habit is using it. So if you use it once, you're more likely to use it again. And if you use it twice, you're more likely to use it even more again. So getting started, even if it's small, I think it's important to set manageable expectations. And I think it's important to be realistic with yourself about what your starting place is, and just recognize that the goal is to grow from there. So get started so that you can go.
Então, a opinião dela é que sim, né? Ela falou lá, até na palestra de hoje, ela enfatiza muito isso nos módulos do Master Pau, é que a comunicação não é atividade, né? Então, o sistema de comunicação alternativa não é atividade, e que deve ser usado o tempo todo, a toda hora, não é só na terapia, não é só na escola e não é só em casa, é em todo lugar, assim como a gente usa a nossa voz em todos os lugares, né? So next question. Crianças que já estão lendo palavras escritas. So with kids who are already illiterate. Gente, acho que tinha alguém com um áudio aberto. So kids who are already starting, they're not fully literate, but they already read some words.
You're muted.
So kids who are already reading some words, no, they're already reading. Do you still use the symbols or not?
Yeah, I think you do still use the symbols. You know, symbols are for communicating because they create efficiency. They're a unique visual cue that let you know that's where that word is. Once we learn to read the symbols, we read to verify. So when you are using a communication device, chances are you are reading the symbols more than you're reading the words more than looking at the symbols, that's part of what makes us better at using the devices initially. So yes, symbols are for communicating. They help to expedite because they provide a really distinctive visual cue that makes it easier to navigate and to find things on the system, but definitely pair it with words.
Okay, but don't take out the symbols. Keep the symbols when the child start reading.
Yeah, and again, like I think it's Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver speak to the fact that letters are for reading and writing, but symbols are for communicating.
Okay. Então, ela diz que sim, que mantém os símbolos são uma dica visual, né, do que é aquela palavra, e que a Karen Erickson e o David Copenhaver, então eles dizem que letras e palavras são para leitura escrita e símbolos para comunicação, até que essa criança seja, until this child is fully literate, right? When she's reading and writing, then she can move on to a text-to-speech system, right?
Yes, a text-based system.
Então, a ideia é que, enquanto a criança ainda ainda não lê e escreve de forma completa, né? Ela ainda use símbolos para se comunicar, a não ser que a criança aí já seja totalmente alfabetizada, ela já leia e escreva, aí sim você muda, então, você sai de um sistema baseado só em símbolos e passa para um sistema baseado em texto, em que você escreve e ele, então, tem o output de voz, né? Tem essa saída de voz. Então, a pergunta da Andrea é, primeiro aperta o símbolo e depois fala, ou fala ao mesmo tempo que aperta o símbolo, ou fala e depois do modelo? So the question is, do you first, when you're modeling, do you first speak and then you press the symbol, touch the symbol, or do you speak and touch the symbols at the same time, or do you touch the symbol first and then you speak? Okay. How is that when you go?
I assume that's referring to a voice output device, because then you're a little bit competing with the voice.
Yes.
That's a good question. I'm trying to think, how do I do that? I think I usually point to the symbol. I think I point to the symbols as I activate the message. So I'll say it and then I'll press it and then I'll keep going and I'll press the next word. Because it's not a one-to-one match, but I think I sort of do it in sync.
Ok. Então, ela falou que ela aperta o símbolo e fala a palavra. Ela está assumindo que a pergunta é para um dispositivo com saída de voz, né? Então, ela diz que ela aperta o símbolo e depois ela fala a palavra, Andrea. One thing that I did with my daughter that I noticed it increased her use of symbols was that I disabled to speak the symbol when we press it. She has to hit the message bar to say the message. So first we construct the message and then she has to press it to say it out loud. So what I do when I'm modeling is that I talk while I'm modeling on her device because it's not speaking. And when I'm done, then I press the message window and it says the message on her system out loud. I don't know if it's possible in every app. I know it works on Compass with Pod, but it's just what is working for us right now. What I saw when we had the symbol speaking at entry is that she would just hit one and whatever it said, she assumed that was her message and then she wouldn't complete her message. And when we did disable the speak on entry, she tries to construct a message a more complete message because it's able to, fix her mistakes too before it says it out loud.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's a good idea to just be aware that there are other options within a system so that you have that. I just want to say, I think that this question, I don't think it really matters all that much. I think what does matter is that it's as naturalistic as possible. I think you want to maintain the level of engagement. So however that fits, depending on the nature of your device and the navigation and the attention of the child is really what is more important.
Order to it. Então, a Andrea, ela falou que então desde que a interação esteja bem natural, não faz tanta diferença se você aperta o símbolo antes. O ideal é que você mantenha o flow da conversa, né? Como eu não sei explicar o flow em português, gente. Mas assim, a continuidade da conversa, né? Que você não precise quebrar esse vai e vem da conversa para a fluência. Obrigada, Andréia. A fluência, o fluxo da conversa. Que seja o mais naturalista possível, natural possível. Se para você o mais natural é você apertar o símbolo e depois falar, então que seja assim. Eu imagino que algumas de vocês entenderam, mas o que eu falei que eu fiz agora, isso tem pouco tempo com a Liora, eu desativei no iPad dela a função de Speak on Entry, né? De falar quando você aperta o símbolo. Então, primeiro eu aperto e ele constrói a mensagem, e depois eu aperto a barra de mensagem e aí fala. E isso tem funcionado muito bem com a Liora. O que eu estava reparando antes é que quando a gente apertava o símbolo e aquilo já falava, a Liora não estendia tanto as expressões dela. Ela já considerava que aquilo era uma mensagem e ela deixava para lá o resto, né? E a partir do momento que eu desativei o Speak on Entry, né? Apertar e falar, ela precisa aprender a apertar a barra de mensagem para falar no final. Isso ajudou ela a passar a construir mensagens mais completas. So we have a question from Renata. It's in English on the chat, but I'll say it in Portuguese. Você tem alguma ideia em como overcome, gente, me ajuda com as palavras em português. Como lidar com a resistência de usar a comunicação alternativa em todos os lugares. So do you have any ideas on how to overcome resistance around using AAC in all places?
Is that resistance on the part of the child or the people that interact with the child?
Partners.
Partners, okay. That's an important distinction. Well, I do have ideas, but I will just preface it with saying that it is one of the most trying things about supporting individuals who use AAC. So at Closing the Gap this year, I partnered with Erin Sheldon, Rachel Langley, and Marlene Cummings, and we did a session on unpacking, dismantling, reframing barriers to AAC implementation. And we focused on the participation model, which looks at the 5 barriers outlined by Buchelman, the attitude, knowledge, skill, policy, and practice. And what I learned through so many of those conversations is that it really is important to figure out all of the barriers are connected. Attitude barriers impact knowledge barriers. Policy barriers impact practice barriers. It's just, you can't really tease one out individually. But I think that attitude barriers tend to be the one thing that you can't information your way out of. Like attitude barriers, you really have to talk to the person you really have to connect with the person on an emotional level. So that can be sharing stories, sharing videos. Like if you have a video of your child or of an individual that you work with, I'm not sure what hat you wear, but if you have a video to share that shows that child's potential or shows that child doing something that's different than what others expect, you can start to break through some of that a little bit. I think extending the knowledge base around things like literacy for kids with complex needs can go a long way to kind of poking away at some of that information, that attitude barrier. Increasingly, we have, there's resources available. I don't know about the translation factor. It's a different kind of barrier, but I think that sharing information is a piece of it, but always keep in mind like how to share the stories of people who use AAC, because I think that that's really where you get at hearts and minds. Another piece of it is figuring out who your allies are. Are you a mom? Are you a parent or a service, a practitioner?
Both.
Both. All right. Sorry, I lost my train of. I'm sorry, Carol. I didn't pause to let you translate that.
Oh, it's okay. Então, o que ela disse que para transpor essas objeções dos parceiros de comunicação de estar usando o sistema em todos os lugares, né? Ela fez uma apresentação agora no Closing the Gap, junto com outras profissionais, falando das 5 barreiras, que é um estudo do Buchelman.
Modelo de participação.
E do modelo de participação e como transpor essas barreiras, né? Então, uma das sugestões que ela deu agora é você mostrar vídeos da criança usando o sistema para mostrar as possibilidades, né? Como essa criança é capaz de usar o sistema e como isso é importante para, então, tentar... Gente, eu acho que alguém... Então, como tentar, mostrando para os parceiros de comunicação a capacidade, né, assim, dessa criança, que isso seja uma forma, então, do parceiro de comunicação passar, então, a generalizar mais o uso desse dispositivo em vários lugares. Go on, Tabby.
I was going to say the other thing is recognizing who your allies are. Like, who is it that sees it the way that you do, and how can they support you in your mission? So if you're playing wearing the hat of a parent, like, is there anybody in your child's school environment, whether it's an instructional aide or a teacher or even an administrator, like, how can that person leverage their influence or their knowledge? Sometimes we try to connect with everybody, and I think that if we're more focused and we're connecting with a certain person, then we can impact, in a different way, but maybe it's more impactful. Maybe it's different. It's such a complex problem. Because people bring to the table their own ideas about what and how, with regard to both what to do and how to do it, and what to think about a child's potential and how to deal with that. I'll have to see if I can share some resources with you, Carol, just related to the conversation that we had at Closing the Gap. What we discovered is there's no specific answer, but there's lots of considerations that maybe you can think about. How do I take what I have and use it in such a way to get the most out of it, rather than, kind of a blanket blasting without any focus.
Rê, você traduz essa resposta que eu preciso ir levar a Liora no banheiro. I have to take my daughter to the bathroom real quick. So Renata is gonna take over here and translate your answer now, and I'll be back in a bit.
Okay.
Acho que ela destacou a importância da gente tentar identificar quem são os nossos aliados nesse processo, né? E aí, a partir dessas parcerias com esses aliados, tentar construir a partir dali, né? O ideal, com certeza, é a gente poder usar isso na maior parte dos espaços, mas talvez, né? Enfim, começar pelos aliados e tentar, a partir disso, mudar a visão, mudar a atitude da pessoa em relação ao potencial e à capacidade, né, de lidar com a comunicação alternativa. Talvez seja por aí o caminho. Ela ficou de verificar se ela consegue compartilhar alguns recursos também conosco em relação a isso. Ok. Now, it's with me then? Okay, let me check questions here. A little bit more on like resistance. There's some comment here on the chat. Okay, it's like when you talk about resistance here, they generally compare it to resisting giving someone a wheelchair, yes, or resisting giving eyeglasses to someone that cannot see properly. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great examples.
Yeah. Eu estou lendo um comentário aqui da Ju, que diz em relação à resistência comparado a resistir da cadeira de rodas ou resistir usar óculos, né? Acho que é uma boa. I guess maybe this comment is because AAC is not really widely used and widely known about people in various places. So we face lots of resistance when it comes to, helping or, including AAC and using AAC. Né? Eu estou comentando com ele que talvez essa pergunta tenha a ver com o nosso contexto brasileiro, onde a comunicação alternativa não tem tanta penetração e por isso cria um pouco mais de resistência. Okay. Another question? Carol, would you like to take over or make the question and then you go on?
Você só traduziu a sua resposta ou você fez mais alguma das perguntas?
O comentário da Ju ali em relação à cadeira de rodas e os óculos. Okay? Acho que a Nath Godoni fez uma outra pergunta, né? What is the most difficult thing about modeling?
The most difficult thing? Okay. Like the most, like getting, like supporting others to model? Is that the question? Maybe.
Nath, você dá uma esclarecida para gente? Quando você fala aí o que é mais difícil da modelagem é para o profissional passar para uma pessoa ou para um parceiro de comunicação que está usando esse sistema? So regarding your professional background, what do you think it is the biggest challenge in modeling when you're modeling, when you're working with your kids? What is your biggest challenge on modeling?
Gosh, there's a lot of ways I could go with that. I think it doesn't feel natural, so it's not intuitive for people. So I think when I'm supporting people and saying, let's do this together, they're a little hesitant to do it in front of me. So I always try to model so that they have something to go after to see what it looks like. But I think that it doesn't feel natural because we don't talk with something else. We talk and then those words are gone and we don't have this concrete thing to interact around. So I think that that it creates a different dynamic in the way that we interact. So I think that getting people past the hurdle of it's not intuitive and it doesn't feel comfortable. I think getting people past that is the hard part, because once people recognize that it's a language, that it can be used across context, once they become comfortable with the idea of it, I think that they kind of take off, and they're still learning within that, but they're more open to the learning and they embrace new ideas. But that first hurdle of just getting past the uncomfortable is really, I think, where so much of the challenge is. More to add, but I'll let you take that first.
Ok. Então, o que ela falou, Nath, é que modelar, né, falar, usar comunicação alternativa não é natural, não é intuitivo, né? Realmente meio esquisito, é estranho. A gente precisa se acostumar e se apropriar desse sistema, dessa linguagem, para cada vez sentir isso de forma mais natural e poder passar isso para o usuário, né? Então, assim, ela acha que o primeiro ponto é realmente tornar isso cada vez mais natural para o parceiro de comunicação, né? Para quem está dando o modelo. I think I've got it. Go.
I think the other part of it too is what people expect AAC to be. So when they start on their journey, there's an expectation or this idea of this is AAC. So once you start to kind of blow the choice making out of the water and say that's not good enough, I sometimes feel resistance because that feels manageable, and more than that may not feel manageable. So helping people to understand that it's so much bigger than just choices. Once they get past, again, like those early attitudes and knowledge, I think is the biggest barrier. Because once we get past that, like the world is wide open for us to explore and expand and grow and learn. But early on, I think that those initial barriers are the hardest part to kind of break through. The other thing is when I work with teachers that have been doing it for a while and have their own way of doing it and haven't stayed current, they're very comfortable. So it's hard to break through their comfort to get them to try new things.
Ok, então o que ela falou, o que ela adicionou ali a essa questão de primeiro você se apropriar, né, dessa modelagem, de você se apropriar dessa linguagem, é que também tem a barreira de que muita gente não consegue entender toda a possibilidade que a comunicação alternativa traz e fica muito naquela coisa de fazer escolhas e pedidos. E que essa é uma das barreiras também que ela acha que a gente tem que transpor quando a gente está modelando, é sair dessas interações de fazer escolhas, né? E a outra coisa que ela falou é que tem muitas... Ela trabalha no distrito escolar, né? Então ela trabalha muito com professoras da educação especial e que o que ela vê muito também é que tem muitas professoras que já têm o jeito delas de introduzir a comunicação alternativa e que é difícil e que são métodos ultrapassados já. A gente hoje já tem muita pesquisa mostrando novas formas da gente estar dando modelo de linguagem, né? E que essas professoras ainda ficam muito presas naqueles métodos mais arcaicos de como interagir com comunicação alternativa, e que essa é outra barreira que ela encontra muito para implementar a comunicação alternativa e ensinar as pessoas a modelarem. Então, que quando a gente transpõe essas barreiras, a gente então entra aí nessa forma mais natural, que eu acho que é o que a gente, né, viu aí nessas 11 semanas do Master Pau. So we do have another question. Então, é um comentário sobre presumir competência, né? Então, é da Renata. Devido à forte penetração do PECs aqui no Brasil com o transtorno do espectro autista, ela sente que outros profissionais ainda desacreditam as crianças e ao profissional que está falando sobre presumir competência. Isso é igual nos Estados Unidos? So, her question is, so here in Brazil, not here because I'm not in Brazil, I'm in California, but in Brazil, I always get mixed up with times and where I am right now. But in Brazil, so we still have a very strong connection between AAC and augmentative communication and PACS and the picture exchange communication system. And it's huge in Brazil. Some people, when you talk about AAC, they say, oh, picture exchange communication system. We're like, no, it's way more than that. So it's a comment about presuming competence, presuming potential. If she feels that it's hard to talk to other professionals about presuming competence because they're still very linked into the ideas of the picture exchange communication system. And they still don't believe in the full potential of the child. Do you still encounter the same challenges in the US regarding picture exchange communication system?
Definitely. Definitely. Actually, in my home state, it's very very much kind of the go-to AAC. So I think that one thing that we just need to keep in mind, like I try really hard to be device agnostic. So I think that there's merit in all devices. There's pros and there are cons. We have to figure out what's a good fit, not just for the child, but for the family and the team. So I think that it's a varied decision. I would say PECS is sort of the exception to that in my book. I think, PECS might be okay for that initial joint attention piece for a short while. After that, let's move on. But PECS in the context of Master PAL is not compatible because there's no role for a communication partner except that facilitator. So it's not about communicating, it's about complying. So it is, I mean, that kind of lays it out. This is a huge conversation that you've been having for 11 weeks. So people don't get there overnight. Mindsets can't be mandated. They have to be nurtured and evolved. And how we do that is kind of an open book. We're making it up as we go. But it's not unique. I think that our challenges are fairly universal.
Yeah, and Master Power is all about, robust vocabulary, and PECS is all about you prove yourself and then you gain more. I'll give you a little more. So it's totally off topic when we're talking about, the modules and everything we've seen in the past 11 weeks, but it's still a challenge in Brazil. People are still very strongly attached to PECS, so they feel we still find a lot of professionals who think there is like a hierarchy that you should go from concrete to symbolic to this, and you should start little, with just a couple words, then grow it out.
Yeah.
Which is just, who has been, I know Renata had the person who did the question. The question, she was on all our modules, but I know what she's talking about. We're still encountering professionals who will say, oh no.
One of the reasons one of the reasons professionals like it is that it's easy to take data on PECs. It's easy to report it back. Whereas when we have anecdotal information about he did this and it meant this and I said this and then he did this, it gets kind of long-winded and hard to take data on. I mean, not that data can't be taken, but you really have to be thoughtful about it, and it tends to be messy. So if you have folks that are really data driven, that can be a difficult conversation to move forward.
Yes, yes. Então, Renata, eu não sei se você vou traduzir então a resposta dela, né? Ela disse que para começo de conversa, né, o PECS nem é compatível com o que a gente viu aí nessas 11 semanas de Master PAL, né? A gente o PECS, ele é sobre conformidade, né? A gente falou tantas vezes no Master PAL essa palavra, conformidade. Ele não é sobre essa interação e nutrir essa vontade de se comunicar na criança. Ele é sobre a criança estar conforme aquilo que a gente está ordenando, né? Então, que ele nem se relaciona ao Master PAL, mas que ela ainda encontra essa dificuldade, sim. Ela disse que no estado dela o PECS ainda é muito forte e ela ainda bate de frente com pessoas que acreditam no PECS. Ela não quer diminuir o valor do PECS, ela diz que o PECS tem sim um valor lá no início, quando você ainda está ensinando aquela atenção compartilhada, né? Então, eu acho que a gente falou isso no Master PAL também, né? Então, quando a criança ainda não tem essa intenção comunicativa, ainda não entende que é uma troca do parceiro com ela, né? Então, a troca de figura pode ensinar ela essa questão da comunicação como uma troca, mas você rapidamente pode passar, então, para um sistema robusto de comunicação alternativa. Go on this line of PECS, you know,
There's one more thing about that too, is you might ask a person, how do you expect them to show what they know if you're not giving them any words? Because it's so limiting. Like, you have to give language in order to get it back. And we aren't gatekeepers of words. So kids use words that are meaningful to them. And if you're giving them words and they lose their meaning because they're the only words they have access to, then you're not giving them you're denying them the opportunity. You're not giving them anything. So you have to give language in order to get language. And if you're not giving language, then how do you expect them to know what they're learning or thinking? Or, I could go on all night.
Então, ela está falando, né, que, assim, que para a gente ter linguagem de volta, né, a gente tem que dar linguagem para a criança, e que o PECS, ele já é um sistema que limita isso, né? A gente não está dando linguagem para a criança, então como é que a gente vai receber linguagem de volta, né? Então, essa questão do PECS isso dá um novo treinamento, só falar de PECS, né? Quem acompanhou aí o Master PAL com a gente juntinho sabe bem disso, né? Mas o Brasil ainda é muito apegado na questão do PECS. So to go on that, so I have a question. So do you think there are any individuals, I think you mentioned it, who would not benefit from a robust vocabulary, a system with a robust vocabulary? Do you think someone would benefit from it?
Do I think everyone would benefit from it?
No, someone, anyone, because I'm not a professional, but I don't see a kid who, unless it's a kid who is so locked into his world and doesn't understand this interaction with another person, then I think that, giving a symbol to get something back might teach this kid, how to interact. But other than that, I see no function for a system like PECS. I want your opinion on that.
I think that there are students that when I am trying to get started at the very initial foundational stages, I might say, let's do a couple trials. And I do mean, like, let's spend 10 minutes 2 or 3 times teaching them the exchange, simply to help them understand that communication happens between 2 people. So I think that there's some merit in that. But even that child, I think I would do wraparound with a robust system. So I think that in the, during, an instructional time or while reading a book, I would probably still try to model words, or maybe related to snack time or something, other times when I can get that child to sort of be present around me. And I won't say interact, but just be present around me. I would probably still model And keep it simple. Like just use a core board and comment on the pages of a book, or if they're wrapped into their YouTube videos, comments about that's funny, I like it, I want to make it stop. So that they have that exposure. So I think that it might have some merit teaching that communication happens between two people. But I do not think that's the exclusion of robust AAC.
Ok. Então eu vou dizer aqui a pergunta que eu fiz para ela, né? Eu perguntei para a Tab, seguindo aí na questão do PECS, né? Se ela acha que existe alguma criança que não se beneficia de um sistema com vocabulário robusto. E a resposta dela foi que ela até tem algumas crianças com quem ela trabalha por 10 minutos no dia, essa questão da troca, que a criança ainda não pescou que para se comunicar você está interagindo com um parceiro, né? Então que ela até trabalha isso, mas que o resto do tempo ela tem um sistema robusto no qual ela vai modelando linguagem para essa criança. Então ela acha que é paralelo, ela não acha que tem alguma criança que não se beneficie de um sistema robusto. E eu vou trazer aqui, eu estava vendo que a definição de um sistema robusto, né, nos Estados Unidos, pelos profissionais, é um sistema que tenha pelo menos 300 palavras, tá, gente? Só para a gente ilustrar aqui. E que 80% dele seja vocabulário essencial, seja core, e apenas 20% seja fringe ou vocabulário acessório. Então, a gente parte aí dessa definição de que um sistema robusto, ele tem pelo menos 300 palavras, e a gente está falando aí, então, de 80% de vocabulário essencial, 20% de fringe. Mas a opinião dela é que nenhuma criança não existe criança que não se beneficie de um sistema robusto. Uma criança ela pode até precisar desse ensino da troca, mas, ao mesmo tempo, em paralelo, você está modelando um sistema robusto de linguagem. So, let me go to the next question. Comentário sobre esse eu já fiz. Nossa, sim, agradeço. Hoje vamos fazer uma atividade com lápis de cor. Que legal. Vamos pegar o lápis. Eu falo modelando e em seguida ela modela, ou até mesmo dou. So Tati is giving an example. Então, I'm going to read it in Portuguese and then I'll say it in English. Vou dar um exemplo. Hoje vamos fazer uma atividade com lápis de cor. Que legal. Vamos pegar o lápis e a folha para fazer um lindo desenho. Quando eu modelo as palavras fazer e pegar, minha criança também precisa modelar na mesma sequência? Eu falo modelando e em seguida ela modela e ela modela não, né, Tati? Aí seria a criança usa, né? Porque a gente está dando modelo e a criança está usando o sistema. Então, ou até mesmo dou dica para modelar as palavras fazer e pegar. So Tati is setting up a scenario. She is working with a child on an activity, and she says, so today we're gonna do an activity with crayons. So cool. Let's go get the crayons, and she's modeling do and get. And the paper, so let's go get the crayons and paper to do a beautiful drawing. When I model do and get, does the child needs to respond with the same words in sequence? Or do I model and then the child says, or even I give a prompt so she says those words?
Okay, that's a good question. We don't choose the words that the child says. We model the words that are our words. We model the words that we are saying in that context, and we let the student say whatever it is that they want. And they might say something that's completely off topic, and that is also okay. We attribute meaning as much as possible. So you're doing a craft activity and maybe they say mix, and that doesn't make any sense, but you had a cooking activity earlier in the day and you're like, oh, you want to mix it. Or maybe they say turn, they're like, oh, you want me to have a turn. Or maybe you want me to mix colors. You just make it up as you go, and you attribute meaning to anything that they say, anything at all. It's not about you telling, like feeding them the words. It's about showing them what kinds of words they could use and then letting them choose.
Ok, então, Tati, o que ela disse é que a gente não indica nada que a criança deve dizer. A gente fala as nossas palavras e a gente deixa a criança responder da maneira dela, e mesmo que seja uma resposta completamente fora do tópico, fora de contexto, a gente atribui significado àquilo que a criança está respondendo. Então, ela deu um exemplo ali, que você podia estar ali nessa brincadeira com os lápis de cor, e aí a criança te responde misturar. E mais cedo vocês tinham feito uma outra atividade de cozinhar em que vocês tinham misturado. E aí você pode, então, se referir a essa atividade. Ou então você pode falar, você quer misturar as cores? E aí você atribui significado ao que quer que seja que a criança está falando.
Carol.
Oi, Tati.
Oi. Na verdade, eu trouxe essa questão por uma experiência que eu vivenciei nessas últimas semanas com uma das minhas crianças que utiliza a comunicação. Enquanto eu modelava, ela logo em seguida já queria também, né? Direcionar aquelas palavras que eu estava modelando. E ela tinha necessidade de fazer essa comunicação com as palavras que eu modelei. Por isso que eu falei, será que é ruim ou não? Tudo bem, posso continuar, entendeu? Essa é a minha dúvida.
Então, deixa eu passar isso para a Tabby. So, Tabby, she clarified. So, what she's saying that she was working with a kid who... right after she modeled something, the kid would try to say the exact same words. And how do you respond to that?
I think I would affirm it. Let's see. The words were do and get. I think I would say, oh, maybe I would put a pronoun in front of it. You want to do it. You want to get it.
Okay.
So I would sort of transfer ownership of those words to the child.
Ok, então o que ela disse, Tati, é que o que você pode fazer é você, então, expandir na comunicação dessa criança. Se ela está repetindo o que você está falando, então, se ela foi e falou, você falou fazer, e ela foi lá e apertou o fazer, aí você fala, você quer fazer. E aí você dá um modelo do você fazer, entendeu? E aí você expande nessa comunicação.
Obrigada.
Ok. Next question. Na opinião da Tab, a escolha por qual suporte de comunicação usar para determinada pessoa, pensando em um atendimento multidisciplinar, deve partir de qual dos profissionais? Fono ou analista do comportamento? So, on your opinion, choosing which communication supports to use for a specific child, thinking on a multidisciplinary work, like when you have a team working with this child, who should be the professional who will guide this, the communication supports, the SLP or the ABA specialist?
The SLP.
A fono.
That's a one-word answer.
A resposta dela.
Here's the thing. An SLP is knowledgeable about communication. ABA is knowledgeable about behavior. Communication is an intrinsically motivating, authentic way that we relate to one another that is innate to the human experience. And that is, I think that very much falls under the hat of the SLP.
Então, ela disse que a fono, porque a fono, ela estudou comunicação e linguagem, né? E a especialidade dela, enquanto que a especialidade do analista de comportamento é comportamento, né? E a comunicação, ela é inerente à natureza humana, então ela acha que é a fono, tá? A analista de comportamento analisa o comportamento. Next question. Oh, we have a lot of questions. I don't know, how is your time, Tabby?
I think I'm okay. I actually do need to send a text to my husband to tell him to put the kids together.
If you're running out of time, I can like get all these questions, send an email to you, and we'll respond them afterwards. So
that's okay. Just give me a second.
Okay.
You can read it in.
Ok, I'll go on reading the questions. Mas será que no Brasil não se usa muito o protocolo do pai? Eles estão... Você acha que quem lida melhor na sua atuação com os grupos de pessoas que você atua? São pessoas com autismo, alguma síndrome, paralisia, ou enfim, que grupo mandei errado? Não finalizei a pergunta, achei a pergunta não fazia muito sentido. Gente, espera aí que eu preciso organizar essas perguntas. So, eu vou falar agora a pergunta da Kátia, tá? Ela atende crianças na piscina. Que dica você dá? So, we have a question here. So, Kátia, she works with kids in the swimming pool. I don't know if she does like therapy in the pool. Do you have any tips to work on communication in the pool?
Yeah, I think that when we have these unique environments where we're naturally communicating, it really compels us to be creative. I like to do a before, during, and after strategy about things that are related to like messy and wet activities. So like if you're going to go to a family picnic and there's going to be a sprinkler and you know your kids are going to get wet, like I would want to talk about that before, like what's going to happen. And then if you can model AAC during that, that's awesome. Take a picture, a video, or take note of specific things that were really exciting and then talk about it afterwards. So you might use AAC to prep the child, and you might use AAC after the fact to talk about it. And then you might use it in the middle, but it might not really be all that convenient or compelling or motivating. So that might not be the best opportunity. So that's one thing to think about in the pool. I'll let you do that and then I'll keep going.
Ok. Então, o que ela falou aqui, Kátia, é que ela gosta de usar um approach de antes, durante e depois. Então, você fala muito sobre a atividade antes dela acontecer. Às vezes, a atividade não é uma atividade que vai te dar a oportunidade de estar usando a comunicação alternativa da criança. Então, assim, se você está na piscina e você usa um iPad, né? Então, você não vai usar um iPad dentro da piscina. Então, você fala bastante sobre a atividade antes e sobre a atividade depois e pode tirar fotos durante a atividade para depois conversar sobre o que foi feito dentro da piscina. A outra dica é você ter uma baixa tecnologia, né? Go on, Tabby, because I might be answering your question.
Okay. So in the pool, I think that, again, we're really back to those low-tech things, but you could in one of the schools that I support, we would take core boards. We had this home screen of every device that was used in the school, and we tied them with zip ties to pool noodles. Like we laminated them and we had them floating around the pool.
Okay.
So that you could point to them. Or we put them on kickboards.
Ok.
So that they could use them in the pool.
Então, a dica dela é que você pode ter, então, uma baixa tecnologia, fazer uma pranchinha que pode ser a primeira página do sistema da criança ou só uma prancha de vocabulário essencial, plastificada, né? E ela pode estar ou presa com aqueles zip ties, eu não sei o nome em português, mas aqueles lacrezinhos, né? Você prende naqueles macarrões de piscina ou numa pranchinha de natação, você adesiva ali naquela prancha de natação ou prende também com esses lacrezinhos na prancha de natação uma prancha impressa para você poder modelar dentro da piscina. Se não for possível, então, eu acho que a ideia da Tab do antes, durante e depois é bem interessante. É uma coisa que eu comecei a usar com a Liora depois que eu assisti o Master Pau, aprendi no Master Pau. So I'm saying that after facilitating Master Pau, I started using a lot more the before, during, and after approach. I was always, freaking out in every activity trying to model. And, model was inefficient because I was always, trying to take care of the kids, model, bring iPads, books, and, bags and everything else. And I never took pictures and we weren't able to talk about it later. And now I'm using the before, during, and after approach. And it's so much easier, and we have so much to talk about afterwards, and we're so much more prepared. And even for writing prompts, we have the pictures now that she can use to write. So I loved that module. That was perfect.
I think another piece of that is that a lot of times when kids are doing those fun activities, like going to the pool, they want to tell people like what happened, but when they're in that moment, they're kind of wild and they're not really wanting to chit chat or make requests. They just want to play and have fun and move their bodies. So one thing that kind of as a follow-up to that we did at the one school that I'm at, we made a conversation board for every specials. So we had one for music, art, PE, and the pool, and I think the library as well. So when kids came back to their teacher, they were able to talk. At the end of the class period, they would one of the adults in that space would go over the board with the child, so they would have a way to say, I had fun in the pool, I really liked whatever. So they could talk, they could kind of have a focused moment to talk about what was great about that experience. And then the teacher would ask it when they get back to the classroom. So they're using essentially AAC to build in this opportunity where they're talking about, and then they're sharing it. So it builds in a social opportunity to share it.
Ok. Ela disse que
That was long-winded.
muitas vezes a criança, quando está nessa atividade, ela nem quer se comunicar, né? Ela está realmente querendo se divertir e aproveitar aquele momento. Então, que essa dica do antes, durante e depois, né? Então, prepara antes, conversa sobre antes, e aí a criança compartilha depois como foi essa experiência, né? E durante a experiência você está realmente aproveitando a experiência. Eu estou falando isso até porque, assim, isso foi uma coisa que eu comecei a usar com a Liora e que fez muita diferença para a gente aqui também. Diferente para determinada discriminação, isso confunde. So, there is a question about, should we use just one symbol set? Sometimes we have different symbol sets. Does it make it more confusing for the child if we use different symbol sets? Should we stick to just one library of symbols?
I think to the extent possible, if you're using a single library, it's less symbols for the child to use. In most instances, I think that's impossible because different systems might use one symbol set, but a school system, I know that's how it is in the US anyway, a school system often has a license for a symbol set, and they might be different. Like in my district, we have kids on Proloquo and Lamp Words for Life. And we have kids on lots of systems, but there seem to be a lot, but our symbol set for our district is board maker symbols. So I think that one of the pitfalls is, doing a lot of Google images and clip art and incorporating sort of random symbol sets in. I think that if we can maintain some consistency in what the child uses and what the school district uses and try to be as consistent as possible, it is beneficial. I think that realistically, it's not possible in most instances to just have one single symbol set. So I think we have to be realistic about that. Ultimately, kids learn symbols in context. So there's a lot to say on that topic, but
então
I think we have to be realistic.
Assim, que ela até tem no distrito dela crianças que usam um símbolo, uma biblioteca de símbolos no sistema delas, e o distrito usa uma outra biblioteca de símbolos, mas que se a gente puder, então, manter um padrão é melhor, é menos confuso, né? É mais fácil para a criança entender esses símbolos, né? A pergunta da Luciane, gente, eu nem falei a pergunta em português, então, devemos usar apenas um padrão de imagem? Às vezes vemos imagens com padrões diferentes para determinada discriminação, isso confunde? O ideal é que a gente tente ficar só com uma biblioteca de símbolos, mas se não for possível, sim, pode usar, mas tentar manter um padrão é bom, é melhor para a criança. Gente, tá entrando muita mensagem, assim, eu não estou nem conseguindo mais acompanhar as perguntas aqui. Eu vou ver o que... Tem uma pergunta da Renata. Então, eu tenho lidado com profissionais interessados em implementar a comunicação alternativa na clínica e em contato direto com crianças que não têm um sistema de comunicação alternativa. Is it okay to try to set up a general robust system? Tudo bem tentar construir... É isso, Rê? Você quer falar a pergunta em português, Rê Bonotto? So the question, I'll say the question in Gabi. So, fala, Rê, fala.
A pergunta em português, você quer?
Em português. Quer esclarecer?
Que assim, às vezes eu estava ainda na ideia da resistência, né? Às vezes eu lido com profissionais que estão interessados em implementar comunicação alternativa, mas assim, ainda não estão lidando com famílias e profissionais que estão interessados nesse uso, mas eles querem introduzir, por exemplo, né, no seu consultório. Então, esse profissional desenvolver um sistema para ele utilizar aí com a criança. Mas o ideal é que a gente faça um movimento contrário, né? Que a gente faça o sistema aí do usuário, para que o usuário use esse sistema, né? Mas isso estando ausente, fazer esse movimento inverso, tudo ok, né? Como é que a gente poderia lidar com isso? Aí lê uma pergunta em inglês aí.
So the question in English, Tabby, is she has worked with professionals interested in implementing AAC in their clinic, where they work with kids, but these kids do not have an AAC system. So they want to come up with their own system to use on their practice. Is it okay for them to set up their robust system to use with different kids who don't yet have a system?
Yeah, I think so. We've actually, that's interesting that question, that's a conversation I recently had with the administrators at one of my schools about, we have kids who are on virtual learning right now, and engaging with them communicatively is hard because they don't have a system. Like, they have some tools, but they don't have a system. Mm-hmm. So we are in the process of actually developing a robust system, and we developed our checkbox list. It has to have core, it has to have access to the alphabet, we have to be able to use it for a variety of purposes, it has to be customizable, related to the child, and have some fringe words that are going to be high frequency and important. So we have some templates, but the idea is that when a child comes to shows up on the first day, they get this. And from there, we'll figure out how we need to customize. But it's not always clear where the starting place is for kids. So if we give them something, then we can say, this works, this doesn't work. These are too big. These don't have high enough contrast. We can start to troubleshoot what does and doesn't work. But if we don't have a starting place, if we're just kind of throwing things in the dark, we might spend too much money on something that doesn't end up working. We might, it gives us the opportunity to do fun and important things with language from the get-go as we figure out what the best access is, what the best symbol set is, what the best tool and organization and all that is. So I actually think that that's awesome.
Ok. Então, assim, a resposta dela é que sim, ela acha que vale a pena, sim, se é um profissional que está trabalhando com crianças que não tem ainda um sistema, mas que, né, eles estão fazendo isso numa das escolas que ela atende, mas que a ideia é que a criança, a partir do momento que ela comece a usar, então, que aí, então, se personalize esse sistema para as necessidades dessa criança. Respondido, Rê. Você quer fazer algum comentário?
No, perfeito. Thank you.
I think my only caveat, and it sounds like this is already part of the conversation, is don't think of it as the end game. Think of it as the starting place.
Okay. Yes. We have recently made kind of a flip book, and it's a low-tech one, and I think it can really be helpful.
Awesome. I think the other thing that it does is if this child now has a tool and they go to school or they go to another therapist or they go to their family, that is like presumed competence in a book. It conveys this idea that this child has communication and language, even when it's not outwardly evident. And it says to other people, like, watch out, this kid has something to say, which is so important to convey that message, regardless of how it manifests itself.
E lembrando, então, que então isso é o início, né? Assim, você faz um sistema genérico, mas que isso, então, não é o final do jogo para essa criança, é o início, né? Dali você constrói o que essa criança vai usar. Gente, alguém tem alguma pergunta que não ficou respondida? Porque entrou muito comentário, eu não sei se eu pulei alguma. Tem aqui, peraí, minha filha tem 4 anos, diagnóstico de TEA, tem muita estereotipia vocal e mesmo sendo verbal, utiliza muito choro para se comunicar, as estereotipias vocais para sinalizar. Sentimento agitado, ansiosa, feliz. Como diminuir e dar função à comunicação de forma adequada e ajudar a se comunicar de forma adequada e funcional, pois a falta de comunicação e temos que adivinhar o que ela quer gera muito comportamento inadequado. Por favor, se puder responder e me dar direcionamento, obrigada. So we have a question from a mom. She has a daughter. She's 4 years old. She's autistic. She has a lot of stereotypes, vocalizations, vocal stereotypes, And even though she's verbal, she uses a lot of crying to communicate, and her vocal stereotypes to signal things like feelings, like when she's agitated, anxious, happy. How to diminish those behaviors and to give function and to her communication and help her communicate in a more accepted form and functional, because her lack of communication and them having to guess all the time creates a lot of inadequate behaviors. How do you go from there?
I think the way that I would probably approach that, and again, like, I don't know that there's any one particular specific answer for this, but one thing to think about is that by stereotypes, just for clarification, does she have like an imitative rote phrase that she uses to convey, or is it a specific sound? So are we talking about sounds or verbal phrases?
Ela está perguntando se essas são frases ou são só sons. Liliane, você ainda está aí? Liliane? I don't know if she's still here.
São sons.
São sons. Oh, so it's just sounds, Tabby. No, not
okay. I think that the way that I would approach that would be to give words to her, and even if you get it wrong, by the very act of validating what she's experiencing, you're giving her feedback to shape eventual communication around that. So what this looks like would be if she is using a sound that says "I hurt," instead of trying to starting to guess, is it this or is it this or is it this? I think I would start off by using her device to say, "You hurt," so that you're giving her that phrase, "You hurt." What? Let's talk about what hurts, and then I might start to troubleshoot it that way and see if she can respond. Or if she's frustrated and you can't figure out why, I would make some best guesses about: are you frustrated that it is different than you thought it would be? Are you frustrated that we didn't do what we normally do? Are you frustrated that it didn't work? Are you frustrated because you don't feel good? Are you frustrated? And I would start to go down that list, whatever makes sense for your kid. I mean, you know them.
Yeah.
And then so you're not putting any demand on her to generate the language. You're giving her the words. You're giving it to her.
And when guessing, you're guessing on the device, right?
Yes. So verbal referencing is go ahead. Forgetting to stop.
Assim, se ela tem um som, né, que indica que ela está frustrada com alguma coisa, você pode modelar no sistema de comunicação dela. Eu estou vendo que você está frustrada, né? E aí você aperta "você é frustrada". E se você não sabe o porquê, então você vai dando fazendo esse processo de adivinhação, mas ao mesmo tempo dando um modelo de linguagem, né? Então, enquanto você está falando assim, será que você está frustrada porque porque não foi do jeito que você estava esperando, e você está modelando essa linguagem no sistema dela. Okay, go on.
Okay, so I think when the word that I often use, or the term, is verbal referencing. So verbal referencing, I think of it as 3 statements: I see, I think, I wonder. So I see that you are frustrated and upset, and on the device I would select frustrated or upset. I think you may not. I think you may be frustrated that we're doing something different, or maybe you feel bad. So I would use that on the device. I would make my best guess. And then the third one is, I wonder if you want to decide what happens next. I wonder if you want to get medicine. I wonder if you need a hug. So I see is just the stating your observation. I think is your best guess. And then I wonder becomes the next step.
Então, ela usa um approach, né? De 3 passos, né? Então, assim, o que você está vendo, então eu vejo que você está frustrada, aí eu acho que aí então é a sua melhor, o seu melhor palpite, não? Eu acho que é porque a gente não foi do jeito que você esperava, e I wonder, né? Será que então você quer escolher o que a gente vai fazer agora, e aí você então dá uma opção de solução, vamos dizer assim, né? Então a gente começa com observar o que está acontecendo e nomear isso. Depois você dá o seu palpite do que está acontecendo, do que você acha que causou o que está acontecendo. E por último, então, você faz o I wonder, né? Que é o será. Vamos pensar numa solução, como que a gente pode resolver o que está acontecendo, que seria um último passo.
And just to be fair, Erin Sheldon was the first person that I ever heard use the word verbal referencing and break it down in that way. I've sort of experienced it in other ways, but that clarity, I think, has made it easier for me to model and think about that. So shout out to Erin Sheldon.
Ok. Falando, ela fala que esse sistema, né, do I see, I think, I wonder. Então, eu vejo, eu acho. E o será, né, ela chama de referência verbal. Quem criou, quem organizou dessa forma foi a Erin Sheldon. A Tab já fazia isso, mas sem ter um nome formal para esse processo, né? E então ela está só dando a autoria aí dessa compilação, nessa sequência para Erin Sheldon. Tá? Mas elas chamam de referência verbal. Então, eu vejo, eu acho e será, e aí uma solução, né? Gente, eu acho que a gente já super abusou da Tab. Eu não sei, alguém tem alguma pergunta assim que queria muito que ela respondesse? A Nath, peraí. So I'll go to the last question, Tab. Então, a Nath botou aqui, vou repetir minha pergunta aqui. Deixei tudo meio desconexo lá em cima. Então, qual o principal sistema de comunicação que a Tab usa com as crianças e jovens que ela implementa a comunicação? Arasaki... Nath, esclarece para mim, o sistema ou a biblioteca de símbolos? Porque sistema e biblioteca de símbolos são muito diferentes, tá? E por que ela selecionou esse sistema específico para atuar nas pranchas robustas e não outro? So the question is, I want her to clarify. Okay, okay. Então, she's asking which system do you communication system do you use most with the kids and in general the people that you serve, you know, that you work with to implement AAC? What symbol library do you most often use? Is it BoardMaker? I know they ask about Arasac. So Arasac is, I don't know if you came across this symbol set. It's a free symbol set from Spain. Do I have my mic on? Okay.
Yep, so I know a little bit about it.
Okay, so it's a free.
Arasac is cough drop symbol system. It's the symbol system used with cough drop.
So which symbol library do you use most often? I think from knowing the systems in English, I know that the systems, they come pre-made with their symbol set. So ProLocal comes with symbol sticks and SnapCore comes with PCS. We don't really get to choose which symbol set we use when you're getting a ready-to-go system. But if you choose a library, which one do you prefer to use?
I can give you an answer to that, but I don't know that it's not a very thoughtful one. The district that I work in, the school district that I work for, has licenses for BoardMaker. So I've always used BoardMaker. Every district I've ever worked in has used BoardMaker. When I was in grad school, that was the symbol set that was available to us. So it's the one I use because it's the one I know. Which isn't a great answer, but I will say that I I think that it is more, the symbols are more distinctive than symbol sticks. So a lot of symbol sticks is a stick person with a red thing, like a red box or a red heart or a red, like their symbols, you almost have to read the word in order to differentiate them or just know the location, you know, based on the pattern. So I don't think there's anything, I mean, the symbols are, a lot of the symbols are not very transparent across symbol sets. So I don't think that is necessarily the question. But this, I've always used PCS because it's what I've always had access to. And that is a differentiation that I think is important to note. And then I haven't used any other symbol sets. So.
Então, ela usa mais o PCS, que é o símbolo do board maker, né? Mas porque ela tem acesso a essa biblioteca específica, né? E ela acha que os símbolos são melhores do que, por exemplo, o symbol sticks, que é os símbolos do Prolocal to Go. Porque, assim, aqui, né, Nath, os sistemas, eles já vêm prontos, os sistemas robustos, né? A gente tem o Prolocal to Go, que já vem pronto com symbol sticks, a gente tem o Snapcore, que vem pronto com PCS. É um pouco diferente do Brasil, onde a gente precisa construir esse sistema robusto, né? A gente tem pouca opção de sistema robusto. So, in Brazil, we have very few options for AAC. We do have access to PCS. You can buy BoardMaker and use it. They have the library in Portuguese, but like a robust system ready to go on an iPad, we only have in Portuguese, Cough Drop, and I think Snapcar First. That's it. Okay. Even pod books, we still don't have
Cough Drop is not available in Portuguese. You can translate them, but you know, in order to add it, you need to go for lots of English.
The whole system, right? You don't have to translate symbol by symbol.
Yeah, you can just Google and have everything translated, but then you have to check every single translation.
But I mean, the system is already done. The symbols are in there. Like Let Me Talk doesn't have the robust system organized. You have to create.
Mas você tem que traduzir, né? O cough drop, palavrinha por palavrinha.
It's word by.
Sometimes you have.
Yeah, we have Sonoflex and Snap and Livox. Those are the three symbols. Livox is not really, you have to build as well. So Sonoflex and Snapcore, those are the ones we have.
Okay, those are both Tobii Dynavox.
Let me talk.
Yes, that's all we have. Ready to go. Like you got here in the US, we have ProLocal, we have LAMP, we have WordPad. Well, you have like an extensive menu of AAC apps ready to go with robust systems. In Brazil, it's very limited. So like Podbook, when I got trained with Linda and Gail, I went back home and I translated the whole book by myself. Yeah.
That's a huge undertaking.
And even though now we have 2 pod trainers, Brazilian pod trainers, we still don't have official pod translation. It's still families and professionals doing it on their own.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a little different from the reality here in the US.
Definitely.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, we do have access to Arasat, which is a free symbol set, and we do have access to, I'll go with you in a bit. And we do have access to PCS symbols that we can buy BoardMaker, but we're very limited in their area comparing to the US.
Yeah.
So you say you use PCS because that's what you have access to, but you have other choices. It's not like in Brazil. We're very limited, especially when we're talking about a robust system that is already done. You know, you don't have to like build it from scratch.
Yeah.
We only have 2 robust systems already done and ready to go, which is Snapcar First and Sonoflex. The rest, you have to translate it or build it from scratch.
So that can be your side gig. You can go from company to company and say.
I've tried. I swear.
We are trying.
Bugging all companies to do a robust system in Portuguese, and it's not that easy.
Yeah, language is complicated, for sure.
I think those are all our questions. Anyone else? I think we're done. I know that the girls from Comunicateia who put this all together, they want to take a picture of us with you. It's just the moms from Comunicateia and you. How do you guys want to go with that? Give me some clue, you guys. Meninas, eu acho que a gente, né, vamos encerrar, a gente já meio que abusou do tempo da Tab. Vamos encerrar agora. Eu sei que a gente quer fazer uma foto com a Tab, eu não sei como é que vocês querem fazer isso, só as mães do Comunicateia. A gente espera todo mundo sair e faz essa foto? Meninas?
Alguém? Acho que todo mundo, né?
Todo mundo junto.
Acho que todo mundo junto, né?
Abram as câmeras, por favor, todo mundo, para aparecer na foto. Ajeitem os cabelos. Passa batom, retoca a maquiagem. Okay, so we're gonna take a picture of everyone together. Tabby, just to wrap this up, and then I'll thank you for all you've done and all your time. Gente, não precisa sair, podem ficar para foto. Todo mundo pode ficar. Eu tô vendo que tem gente saindo, não precisa sair. Todo mundo na foto. Foto feita, gente? Gente, eu não sei quem fez a foto, mas quem fez está feita? Posso agradecer agora e encerrar? Gente, então eu acho que é isso. Ben, I'm almost done here. Yeah, and you're jumping on your under. That's great. You're going to YouTube. Sorry, kid. The perks of doing this from home with all my kids in the house. Gente, então eu vou agora agradecer, eu vou finalizar, vou agradecer a Tab. Vou agradecer primeiro a presença de todas vocês, né, de todo mundo que esteve aqui essa noite para assistir essa palestra, para a gente fazer esse encerramento, então, do nosso Master Pal. Tab, I have no words to thank you. Gratitude doesn't even scratch the base of it. Making Master Pal available, so thoughtful for people with complex communication needs. It's been, I know I've heard, other people, participants from our Master Pal Brazil saying how you've already changed lives in Brazil and how you've already changed the way people are doing their practice with their kids. It's been quite a ride being able to facilitate this for this group. We had professionals from like top colleges in Brazil and families from kids who already use AAC, kids who are starting to use AAC, and just families who want to start using AAC with their kids to change their lives. So making Master Pal available was just, amazing. I have no words to thank you. What I did translating it and facilitating it it's just a detail. It's just, that's what I said to this moms and professionals this whole time is that facilitating this, I've learned so much and I've done so many changes in the way I approach communication with my daughter. And I've already seen so many glimpses of how, just making little tweaks in the way we do it has such a big impact on the way she uses it. Today, I shared one of her last communications with me, and we were doing a writing assignment with Kate Ahern because we're in her online group, and we were talking about ourselves and just using, all the learning that I did on Master Pal, supporting Leora. She was able to tell me that the way she sees herself outside and inside, and it made me cry on the day, and it still makes me cry today. So she said that she's naughty on the outside and she's perfect in the inside. And I don't think I would have this insight into her thinking if it wasn't for the strategies that I've been implementing over the last 11 weeks, facilitating Master Power and learning from your knowledge. So thank you so much. Thank you for making this session, this presentation available for us. Yeah, my kid right here. This presentation available for us in Brazil, giving your time to us and just being here today to answer questions. It's been amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, honestly, it's been my pleasure. I can't tell you how much it means to me that it is touching lives. Like I said, I didn't set out to make Master Pal as is. I just started to organize my ideas, and I am so glad that others are benefiting from that. So the fact that these conversations are happening, I mean, we're going to change the world, all of us, for those who use AAC, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So I think there's so much gratitude to all of the people that have come before us to sort of guide the way and keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, but finding Master Power and facilitating it just brought the Brazilian community together. You know, I've always been part, the international groups, and I've been following, I say that Erin is my guru since Leora was diagnosed with Angelman syndrome. I don't just follow her because of her AAC stuff, but because of seizures and everything that she talks about. She's
a wealth of knowledge.
And having that support in the international community and always trying to gather, families in Brazil, it was so hard. And Master Power just brought us all together. And now we have our own Facebook group where we all share our knowledge and our experience. And I know that, if it wasn't by stumbling on Master Power, because Deanna Wagner mentioned it, we found it like so readily available at Practical AAC that made me connect with Carol Zangari. It's just like it's just the universe working to really making us go forward and giving, making sure that every voice counts and every voice is heard, and that we can give a voice to every child with complex communication needs. Thank you so much. Some people talk about, how the butterflies, they fly in one place, and the wind from their wings will make such an impact on the other side of the world. Well, Master Paul was the wind from the wings of your butterfly, impacting the lives of so many people in Brazil. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to start crying, so I should wrap this up before, I melt my makeup and go all panda style here. So
well, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your community and spend time with you tonight. This was a joy.
Thank you. I have no words. Thank you. I will bug you on your email. Sorry, but now I have your contact, and I'll make sure I use it wisely. But if any questions come up, if anything comes up, I'll reach out to you. And
yes, we should stay in touch for sure.
Yes, please. And thank you so much once again. And thank you so much for what you do for the Angelman community. Because I know that, connecting with Erin, you're impacting the Angelman community as well. Not just the complex communication needs community, which is wider, but, the community that is really dear to my heart, that, made me become an AAC expert because of my daughter, Angelman syndrome. I say it's the biggest curse in my life and the biggest joy of my life as well. So thank you for all you do for our community in specific as well. Gente, obrigado pela presença de todo mundo. Acho que a gente fechou aí esses 11 módulos de Master Pal com chave de ouro, né? Com a participação da TEB. E eu acho que a gente pode encerrar aqui, né? Thank you, Tabby.
Thank you.
Obrigada.
Gratidão. Boa noite, gente.
Tchau, boa noite. Obrigada.
Bye, bye.